It's like in the days, waiting in the water, and I know it ain't a phase, but I can't stay in the water. Life ain't offering any easy elevation. Slowly overperform. We raise the bar, exceed the norm. Keep breathing, even though every breath we fight, I choose to keep breathing. She doesn't need a blessing unless you're
Goodbye the spirit comes from the source. Ethiopians and the Greeks, from the sun we was forged. Living under the sword, keep us fighting for cheddar. Frozen hearts never fold. We just gotta be better, dedicated to war. Even target our children, shouldn't take them on thoughts. Even you rebuilding, give us permanent pilgrims. Never welcome this kid.
That's the blessing unless you're
Struggle, hustle, we feel the blood of the kings. Enemies lust for our vision. We do impossible things. Never less than the grace of our king. Living pious and righteous, with righteous open to sin.
Keep breathing, even though every breath we fight, I choose to keep breathing. I wouldn't choose any other blessing unless you know you find. It's like I've been in the days, waiting in the water, and I know it ain't a phase, so I'm just treading water. It's like I've been in the days, waiting in the water, and I know it ain't a phase, but I can't stay in the water. Life ain't offering many elevation. Slowly perform. We raise, see the storm and keep breathing. Even though every breath we fight, I choose to keep breathing. I wouldn't choose any other blessing unless I know you're
Ready for something heavy with destined for change. Up in heaven, there's nothing better. We love and embrace. Living to last, we always long from the heart. Cause violent, but in the silence, they long for a path. Everywhere we shoot is energy, next to the soul. Enemies, next to the vibe. Melanin gifts to the fold. Now we've seen us the honest pious and bold. And what the system was meant to break only made us a whole.
Keep breathing.
Jealous guns drawn, blood to draw blood, but lost war.
Keep breathing.
Every sin that they committed against us will face judgment.
Hello, everybody. You leave that mic there. Let me know. That's my new single, by the way, that was playing in the back. I hope it was playing through. I hope you guys heard it. Let me know if you heard it. That's being released on March the 10th. So I will probably post it up when it goes live on March 10th on streaming platforms. But if you like the tune, let me know. It's called Elevation, in brackets, Treading Water. I really like the song. I get a lot of emotion out. And I think I think that's one of the things that drew me to Tupac when I was growing up, was that he was more than just a musician to me. To me, he kind of was a complete, I don't know how to describe it. He was like everything rolled into one, a musician on all levels. But on top of that, you know, it was the quality of character, it was the passion, everything rolled into one. So yeah. Thank you, Liz. Wildflower said it's fire. I appreciate it. I'm glad it came through. And my mic should be better now. I did a live stream yesterday, and I can only apologize because, long story short, if you're on I did a live stream earlier today as well, and I explained this, that I live streamed twice yesterday for hours, and my software had done a really weird thing. Basically, there was a software update, a firmware update on my sound card, and when it had finished doing its thing, it switched all my settings on all of my streaming, on all of my live stream platforms. So I was picking up the wrong mic. So the mic yesterday for me was terrible. It was just all fan noise. It sounded horrible. But I'm hoping that it's resolved now. So let me know actually in the chat if my mic should sound nice and punchy and clear and there shouldn't be any fan noise in the background. Just confirm to me that that's the case. Otherwise, I'll have to go in and switch settings again in case it keeps defaulting to it. But just let me know that the sound is fine. And then we'll get underway today. So today's live stream, I haven't done a live stream like this for a little while, where we look at what's what's been released in the latest studies. And I think the beachy head woman one is really interesting for anyone on the channel, because we've covered beachy head woman in previous live streams. And this update I was surprised by it. And then also, I have to say, on top of being surprised by it, I was also disappointed by it. And we'll see why I was disappointed by it when we get there. But the beachy head one was a little bit, yeah, it was a little bit kind of like, yeah. But we'll see. We'll see when we get there. We'll go through it together, because one of the things that I feel is taking place is that a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that comes out from academia regarding our origins and the manipulation of DNA, I feel like that's unraveling. I did a documentary recently, which I'm sure most of you on the live stream have watched before. Yeah. And that documentary is called let me find it. Let me give you the exact name. But it's to do with DNA, and it's basically along the lines of the bias. Okay, there are two major topics that are covered in that documentary, and those are ascertainment bias and and Eurocentric genotyping arrays. So it covers both of those, and both of those phrases might sound a little bit long-winded, but I promise you, if you watch that documentary that I've done, all of this will make sense, and you'll understand how genetic data is being manipulated to tell a story that isn't true. It's a false story, and they deliberately use biased genotyping arrays which amplify the European signal whenever they come across ancient DNA. So they're essentially writing themselves into paths of history where essentially there was no European ancestry present. And when I say European, I mean modern European, not ancient European, because even ancient European don't show the ancestry of modern Europeans. So it's like that's the issue. And unfortunately, what's happened is the modern field of genetics has inherited a lot of baggage from the faulty foundations of anthropology, which are still rooted in scientific racism. And we see a lot of carryover into the modern study of genetics in the field of ancient DNA. And I felt really encouraged, because I recently started reading, I haven't finished it yet, but I recently started reading the doctoral thesis of Dr. Sasha Enriquez, who I had on the channel. She's a geneticist who I had on the channel. And her doctoral thesis covered almost exactly the same topic, but obviously from a much more expert perspective than I did, but it tackled all of the same points. And I was like, yes, this is identified in the field by qualified PhDs, that this bias exists, and this false analysis, these false positives, this false, this underrepresentation of Black and African people, and this false retelling of history. And unfortunately, anthropology so often relies on historical narrative, and then they'll try and make what they found fit the false historical narrative that they've been given, and then they use one to confirm the other. So I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail, but I feel like we're at a really pivotal stage in history, where we're making our mark. We're kind of entering the fray and saying, no, you're not gonna, similar to what Sheikh Anta Diop did with Egyptology. He said, no, you're not gonna just completely lie and steal this. Before Sheikh Anta Diop made that important step, and obviously I know there were scholars before him, W. Du Bois and a few others from different parts of the world, but I think Sheikh Anta Diop made a very poignant impact on the field where they could no longer ignore the African voice. And since then, we've been present. They've been unable to shake the African presence in that area of the world. Now, there's a whole lot more work to be done, but I feel like we're at a similar stage now in terms of genetics, where they've been getting away carte blanche, making up a whole load of nonsense using genetic data to confirm what is a false and racist narrative. But we are now at the stage where we can challenge, pick out where the flaws are and say, no, let's reanalyze this and do it from an honest perspective. Okay, that's what's really important. All right. Liz, if you're in the chat, Wildflower, give me a shout. Just say, yo, I'm here. I just want to know if you're here, because that would be really cool. So I'm giving a shout out to Wildflower there. Let me know that you're here in the chat. I've got a job for you. But yeah, so that's that really. I want to get into this. We've got a few studies that we want to kind of cover today. So I want to get into this as much as possible. Yo, Wildflower, ban Manly Clyam. Manly Clyam, they're irritating me. Just ban them. For as long as you want. I want you to pick how long you ban them for as well. Yeah. Thank you. I ain't got time to be arguing with idiots. By the way, I allow people to come in and offer dissenting voices and to critique and to ask questions. I don't allow people to come into my chat and disrespect. If you disrespect, yeah, you get gone. So yeah, Wildflower, deal with the matter, please. Thank you. Let's get these up. Thank you, sis. I appreciate it. Okay. Now let's talk about this study first of all. So we're going to come on to Beachy Head Woman, but I just want to go through this study. Beautiful to see. I'm not sure how long 86,000 seconds is, but it feels like it'll be longer than this live stream. So good job, Wildflower. All right, let's get going. Now the instructions gone. Were Neanderthal men the Romeos of the prehistoric world? Now I'm not going to go into the deep science of this, yeah, and I know a lot of you are going to be really keen. Exactly. If I almost said like we haven't even started yet and they're already talking, name calling and doing all kinds of, let's just chill out, man. Just chill the hiffle out. Be quiet, okay? You might learn something if you learn to shut your trap, okay? Otherwise, leave. We ain't got time for your idiocy here, and we ain't got patience for it either. Looking for that weak acquiescing man. You're not going to find him here. Yeah. This one tickled me. So I'm really going to be entering this article with a little bit of skeptical mockery more than anything. I don't think it requires any more than that, because what we're experiencing with this article is a huge Eurocentric cope, which culminates with the reclassification of Neanderthal man as an advanced, civilized, better than human, better than Homo sapien, strong, preferable enhancement to the human genome. That's what Eurocentrists has been working on with Neanderthal man ever since they learnt that they carry Neanderthal genes and we don't. So ever since they learned that Africans don't carry Neanderthal genes, we are pure Homo sapien. Sapien knows movie. Oh, ghost DNA. Ghost DNA is just unsequenced human DNA. Okay, it's just part of because they don't test in Africa. They haven't gathered enough DNA to ascertain what ghost DNA is, and they're trying to reclassify it as another species of human being. The difference between ghost DNA and Neanderthal man, Denisovan, etc., is they have the body of those. That's how they ascertained they weren't human. They found them and they were like, oh, these are not human. These are another species. And then the DNA, the genetic confirmation of that came afterwards. The difference between that and ghost DNA is they're so happy to find something in the African genome that looks foreign, because up until now they've had to deal with the fact that we're 100% Homo sapien sapien. They've had to deal with that. It's kind of like, well, you guys are mixed with Neanderthal. Okay, that's a fact. You got, like, Europeans are mixed with Neanderthal, Africans are not, and that has been a huge kick in the nuts for scientific racism. Because scientific racism would have loved if it was the other way around. Imagine if they found out after all those years of scientific racism and Samuel Morton and Darwin and all of these racists, you know, Seligman, all of them. Imagine after pushing all of that, black people are monkeys, black people are deficient. Imagine after all of that, they found out it was black people that carry 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, and they were the pure Homo sapiens sapiens. Can you imagine the headlines? Do you think you'd have an article that says, were Neanderthal men the Romeos of the prehistoric world? We wouldn't have any of this bollocks. They'll be talking about how dumb knuckle-dragging Neanderthals were. This explains the backwardness of the African man. This explains the low IQ of Africa, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. They'd be giving it all the large. But unfortunately, God had it that it was the reverse. Unfortunately. Yeah? God had it that it simply was the reverse, and actually Africans are 100% Homo sapien sapien, and it turns out that Europeans are mixed with Neanderthal. So now what they have to do is a very, very desperate rebranding, very, very desperate rebranding of Neanderthal man. Now Neanderthal man has to be better than human, because Neanderthal man has to be the answer. Neanderthal man has to be the reason why the European is superior to the African. And that's what is subtly taking place here. You'll find that they've softened language. They've changed terminology, this idea of, you know, let's read through the article, because I am telling you right now that it's absolutely ludicrous the way they're rebranding Neanderthal man. Even that whole idea of the Neanderthals being first to create art, that is a load of bollocks. They have such little evidence that that artwork was created by Neanderthals, but they don't care. They're going to give Neanderthal man as much positive press as possible. That's exactly what they're going to do. And they're going to try and take 100% Homo sapien sapien, being us Africans, and they're going to try and say, oh, you know, I had people saying, oh, Africans, bestiality, you guys have got 20%. So wait a second. We've got ghost DNA, which is simply unsequenced human DNA. But the fact that we've got ghost DNA means that we committed bestiality. 20% means we should be finding these ghost DNA bones everywhere, and you'll be surprised or unsurprised to know that they haven't found anything that resembles a non-human carrying ghost DNA. So they can't prove that ghost DNA is nothing other than a human. However, they interbred with Neanderthal man, and then they don't want to call that bestiality. In fact, they're going to make Neanderthal man look as human as possible. He might have been covered from head to toe in fur, but no, they're going to give him this human look and this Chad jawline and this. They're really doing their best. This article is a massive cope. It's unbelievable. Okay, let's read this article. Let me get rid of this banner and give a shout out to the donation, and then we're going to start reading this article together. Oh, and by the way, I feel like you could be hitting the trigger a bit more, Liz. There's another little troglodyte we need to block in the chat. Yeah, you know, chop them. Yeah, I ain't got time. If they can't come with respect, they want, you know, just get rid of them. Yeah, if you want to come and you want to debate, do it with respect. If not, you're gonna get chopped. Liz, you know who I'm talking about. Go ahead. Shout out to Rodham. Thank you very much for $10. He said they can't rebrand. Neanderthal died out 40k years ago. Pale Europeans would not exist for another 20k years. Yes, and the irony is the impact and the imprint of actual direct ancestors of modern Europeans. is very, very small and largely fabricated. And they've been doing a lot of that through the biased analysis of DNA, basically through ascertainment bias they've been writing themselves into. Let me know, in fact, in the chat, just let me know. You have to leave a entire diatribe, but just write a little comment if you saw that documentary that I did on ancient DNA and ascertainment bias, and if it helped to, if it's helping with this entire subject. I just want to know, kind of like, now's probably a good time to ask. I'll probably do a poll, but you know, just it'll just be interesting to kind of see some feedback regarding that. Yeah. Let's carry on. All right. So thank you very much for that donation, by the way, Rodham. Let's start reading this article. So I'm going to just quickly change the screen size as well. Let's get a bit more article, a bit less me. There we go. Were Neanderthal men the Romeos of the prehistoric world? When ancient humans interbred, new research shows that the pairings were predominantly male Neanderthals and female Homo sapiens. So we already know that this will be an analysis of the Y DNA, well, Y and the mitochondrial DNA, to be able to come to this conclusion. So in essence, there'll be a strong preservation of the Y DNA. That's the DNA that's passed from father to son. There'll be a strong preservation of that lineage than there will be of the mitochondrial DNA, which would have helped them to basically come up with that. So let's read through. So basically, we're carrying Neanderthal mitochondrial. Sorry, they're carrying Neanderthal Y DNA, but they're not carrying Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA. They're carrying human mitochondrial DNA. So this reconstruction is hilarious because they're trying to show Neanderthal man to look as human and as attractive as possible, because the one thing that they refuse to acknowledge about this interbreeding session is that it has to be consensual. It has to be preference based, because Neanderthal was not a brute. Neanderthal was definitely not a brute. Neanderthal was a gentleman who held open doors and arrived in a limo to collect their human mistresses. He definitely wasn't an RAPist. That doesn't happen in their culture at all, does it? Let's carry on. Neanderthal men may have had a thing for modern human women, or perhaps Neanderthal men had something human women couldn't resist. Look at the language that's being used here. This is absolutely ridiculous. That's one potential interpretation of a new study published Thursday in Science that found when Neanderthal and Homo sapiens interbred, the pairings were predominantly between Neanderthal men and human women. Okay, we already know there's a lot of reasons that will be the case. Okay, that could be the case of losing conflict. Okay, that could be that's normally the case when you also have an invading horde. If an invading horde goes and invades a village, they will kill the men and they preserve the women. Okay, and then the results of that initial raid, or the results or the offspring of that initial raid, who will be half human, half Neanderthal, perhaps were enough human to pass as humans, and therefore they were carrying that lineage and maybe continued to be successful at raiding, maybe because they were more aggressive, because they were holding that Neanderthal DNA. Let's carry on. Scientists have long known that some of our ancestors reproduce with Neanderthals before the species went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago, as mentioned by Rodham. Today, traces of Neanderthal DNA linger in the genomes of many people, particularly among those with non-African ancestry. On average, it amounts to about 1 to 2% of the person's genome. Now, to be clear, this is one of the main arguments, amongst others, that they raise for there being this gigantic split where modern, whatever's split from Africans, and then never the twain shall meet again until like recent times. You only need a contribution of Homo sapiens for this to take place. It doesn't have to be some gigantic split that dates back 70,000 years. That's not even realistic in human history. It's likely that waves of humans came into Europe after this event who didn't carry Neanderthal DNA. And in fact, we have evidence of that in the DNA. In fact, the DNA should be much higher for these older populations to carry much higher proportions of DNA if the story went of Neanderthal DNA, if the story went the way that they claim it went. So if the story went the way they would claim it went, if you go back, closer to 35,000 years, you should find that all humans in Europe should carry massive amounts of Neanderthal DNA, and then it gradually falls as they continue to mix with other people. But what you find is actually, no, they keep pulling up this ancient DNA and it carries very trace amounts. And that points to the fact that we have a small, isolated group that suddenly expand much later in history. And this is the part of history they're not telling you. They're trying to trick you using these large splits. And once again, their biased DNA analysis. However, these leftover bits of DNA aren't evenly distributed through the genome. Even in people with relatively high percentages of Neanderthal DNA, like 4%, there are specific regions of their genomes, particularly in their X chromosomes, that are devoid of it. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. Now, this is also leans into something that another geneticist, I think his name's David Reich, suggested in terms of modern Europeans. He suggests that modern Europeans actually carry much higher percentage of Neanderthal ancestry than 2 to 4%. But what he essentially says is only 2 to 4% of ancestry actually shows. So they carry much more. He thinks in the region of 10 to 20%. I think he might have even said 20 to 40, but don't quote me. But I know it's around the 20 mark. So either 10 to 20 or 20 to 40. I need to double check. This is what David Reich says. And he says that's probably much more realistic for modern Europeans in terms of how much Neanderthal ancestry they carry. But what he says is that because the Neanderthal ancestry or the Neanderthal DNA is deficient, it was selected out as part of ongoing mutation and evolution process of those populations. They found that Neanderthal genes were weaker, were less advantageous, which flies directly in the face of them trying to present Neanderthal as this advanced being. It clearly isn't advanced. Okay, it's much less advanced than Homo sapien, but this is what they try to sell. These Neanderthal DNA free zones, known as Neanderthal deserts, have puzzled researchers. Many thought the deserts were the product of natural selection, eliminated undesirable bits of Neanderthal DNA over time. That's what I think I just mentioned there. Okay, that's what Professor David Reich said. The new study instead argues that the gaps reflect ancient pairing patterns between the two groups rather than steady removal of harmful genes. Interesting. There's been this long-standing hypothesis that we modern humans have been shedding our Neanderthal ancestry for the last 45,000 years. Now, that's interesting because you didn't share that with anyone, did you? I've only heard David Reich talk about the shedding of Neanderthal ancestry. You guys talked about it like it was a definite binary contribution. Yes, we are 2 to 4%. You never said we're much higher than that, but we've been shedding it. But it's funny how now they're admitting it. And this is what I mean about this manipulation of what they present the public with. They're saying one thing, and then now they've completely flipped the script and talked about, oh, there's been a standing hypothesis. Whoops, what happened there? Well, there's been a standing hypothesis that we've been shedding our Neanderthal ancestry. Well, you kept that quiet, didn't you? You didn't. You weren't very opaque with that, were you? Says Alexander Platt, an evolutionary geneticist at the University of Pennsylvania and co-author of the study. I don't care for the theory. Oh, so he doesn't like that theory. So let's see what he says instead. Platt thought there was a better explanation to figure out how genes from the two species mixed. He and his colleagues examined 3 Neanderthal genomes. They also compared the data to African genomes without Neanderthal ancestry, excuse me. They found that X chromosomes of the Neanderthals contained about 60% more Homo sapien DNA compared to their non-sex chromosomes or autosomes. Okay, so we have the X chromosomes that are shared between both male and female carry X chromosomes. I'm not going to try and act like an expert here because I'm not, just working out in my head. So both male and females carry X chromosomes, but only men carry the Y chromosome as well. So he said the autosome, he says a non-sex. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So the autosome is not part of your gender. The autosome is something that is carried both by men and women as well, but it's not a part of what decides your gender, like the X and the Y chromosome. So I'm guessing that's what's being discussed here. The imbalance, like the researchers say, indicates that many of the Neanderthals' female forebears were likely Homo sapiens. Okay, so talking about the fact that people with Neanderthal DNA get it essentially from their fathers or from the male side. Prehistoric wandering eye. Females have 2 X chromosomes, while males have only 1 and 1 Y. When they reproduce, the mother always passes on an X chromosome, while the father only passes on his X if he has a daughter. As a result, the X chromosome is inherited more often from mothers than from fathers. Okay, that makes sense. So men only pass on an X chromosome if they have a daughter, obviously. So if they have a son, they pass on a Y as opposed to an X, which makes sense. Okay, if interbreeding, so that means men decide the gender. Learn something new. I should know that. I should know. Okay, if interbreeding predominantly occurred between male Neanderthals and female modern humans, the researchers say, relatively little Neanderthal X chromosome DNA would enter the human gene pool, which is what scientists see today. So I'm going to read that again. If interbreeding predominantly occurred between male Neanderthals and female modern humans, the researchers say, the relatively little Neanderthal X chromosome DNA would enter the human gene pool, which is what scientists see today. Well, that's one way to explain it, but then that could also be explained with the selecting out, which has been proposed before. This is just another explanation. It's not certain. So this is just the postulation that is just as strong as the one that they had before, because they're seeing, oh well, we got little Neanderthal DNA in the X chromosome, because women contribute 50% of the X chromosome. No, sorry, because women contribute more of the X chromosome than men. Yeah, women contribute more X chromosomes than men do, who only contribute it half the time people are born. Therefore, they were mostly human women. It's just a possibility. That's just a possibility. Sorry, someone said my sound's been coming and going a few times. That's really irritating. I think that's to do with my internet access. Apologies. It says excellent there, just monitoring, and it says decent there. Let me know if it's a continuing issue, guys. Let's carry on. You almost couldn't turn the bias up high enough in the models to get the patterns we're seeing, he says. What we're seeing here is not just survival of the fittest in the classical Darwinian sense, but the imprint of very broad and very common sex biases, says Platt. The reason these interspecies couplings, notice the language once again, interspecies couplings. This reminds me of a live stream I saw by he's a decent YouTuber. His name's Milo, not the Mini Minute Man Milo, another Milo, who does this kind of thing. And he was talking about, oh yeah, when did this giant love making occur? And they have all of these euphemisms, these playful, nice euphemisms, and they're only talking like that because they're dealing with their ancestors. You have to understand that this kind of really over, this kind of like, this over complimentary, You know, really like they try and make everything sound so sophisticated and so above board and so freaking consensual, and they only talk like that because they know that they're dealing exclusively with their ancestors. If this was something that was across the entirety of humanity, they would be a little bit more honest about it. And if it was something that was coming out of Africa, they would say nothing but Neanderthal men kidnapped and raped women, human women, Neanderthal monsters in the. This is how but can you see the way that they talk? Interspecies couplings. Some might call it bestiality. Okay, that's what some might call it. They might call it interspecies, non-consensual, you know, all sorts. But this is the reality, you know. Once again, we're getting that version that is complementary to their backstory. The reason these interspecies couplings largely involved male Neanderthals and female humans may remain a mystery to scientists. I bet you they don't want to find out. I bet you they could find the evidence of violence. I bet you they could find all of that. Probably wouldn't have to look too hard to find it, but they don't want to find it. What they want to find is art and sophistication. Neil deGrasse Tyson has a really excellent should I call it a short, or you know, a piece of content that you can find online, where he talks about the fact that Neanderthal, you know, throughout the 20s, 30s, before they basically did genetic testing and they found out that Neanderthal was exclusively an ancestor to non-Africans, they used to talk about Neanderthal. It was an insult that they would throw out to people. Oh, you knuckle dragging Neanderthal. I mean, I still use that as an insult. I don't see why we should stop using that as an insult, because they carry a small trace amount, you know. You know, you know, why I don't, you know, is it offensive? Is it offensive? Do they? Is that be interested? I'll be interested to know. As a European, I'm sure I know I've got some Europeans in this live stream right now. I've got 132 people live, and I've already seen two relentless trolls. So let me ask you, Europeans who are on my live stream, do you find it offensive when people insult Neanderthals? Do you feel like people are offending your ancestry? Because I'd be really interested to know that, actually. Or do you see yourself as, you know, the only thing that's important is Homo sapien, because that's the true human aspect? Is that how you see it? Or do you see it as, you know, don't diss my Neanderthal granddad? I need to know. You know, I just need to know where people sit with this. All right, so I lost my trail of thought. Let's go. But Platt and his colleagues have one possible theory they think could be the simplest answer. Neanderthal men and human women may have potentially found each other particularly attractive. Now, what, isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient? When have you heard about so so I can imagine this, yeah. So what happened is all of the human women, yeah. The human woman used to be like chilling out around the campsite, and then they'd just be chatting. They'd be like, "Oh my god, did you see grog of the today?" Because remember, Neanderthals couldn't speak, by the way. Neanderthals don't have the vocal capabilities to speak. That's been proven. So you know for a fact Neanderthals had no speech. Okay, so they'd be sitting around. Did you see grog of the? He looked good today, didn't he? Oh my god! You can't go. You know, what if David finds out? No, I want grog. I want grog to have my baby. It's like, come on, this didn't happen. What are you talking about? These grunting, knuckle dragging, friggin' giant eyebrowed, like Neanderthals weren't Chads, man. Okay, they freaking look like they look like gorillas. You can Neanderthal skulls look like gorilla skulls. What they've done is they've carefully plastered as much humanity onto that gorilla skull as possible. But a Neanderthal skull, Google it now for yourself. I'm not even gonna do it. Yeah, you Google a gorilla skull and Google Neanderthal skull and tell me how different they look. And you're talking about humans, talking about, oh my god, oh yeah, I'd let him pound my drum any day of the week. Like, what are you talking about, man? Like, what are you talking about? They found each other particularly attractive. Yeah, I mean, I would venture on the side that Neanderthal men, if you were to call them that, male Neanderthal species probably found human African queens, yeah, attractive. I think that's quite a possibility. Yeah. Yeah, maybe they carried out that, that maybe they carried out raids. I don't know. What's funny actually is I almost want to find it. Have you guys seen my short on wild men and the Moors? Yeah, wild men who probably resembled Neanderthal, but there seemed to be a trope among the wild men that they used to try to capture. They used to try to capture human women and take them, and then that's one of the ways they used to kill off the wild men. They kind of like, you know, leave a human woman out there as bait, and then the Neanderthal would try and, or the, I say Neanderthal, sorry, then the you know, the wild man would try to come and then they'd kill it. You know, it's interesting, you know, but what this is like super cope, man. I know these guys love to act like they're so like, oh, I got cope, really Afrocentric cope. I ain't never seen no Afrocentric cope like this. Yeah, I ain't never seen no Afrocentric cope like this. They found each other. So human women didn't find their own species attractive, but they found. Yeah. Nah, you lot are on some crack, man. You lot are seriously on some crack. Let's carry on. The researchers, and this is why I don't take academics seriously as well. A lot of people give academics way too much credence. They give them way too much respect. This is why I don't take them seriously. One thing I've learned doing what I do in terms of research, I'm sure you guys have noticed, just like when we go through these papers and we study, a racist is a racist. It don't matter if you put a PhD behind their name. It don't matter if you put a master's and, you know, all of these, you know, you can put all these qualifications, you know, I mean, double PhDs, professor, this, that. A racist is a racist, and a racist will always be a racist. And a racist only wants nothing more than their racist ideologies to be fulfilled. Okay. And if they get a PhD, then that's when you're more screwed, because what they'll do is they'll produce studies to reaffirm their racist notions. Okay. That's all they'll do. They'll get funding, and they'll get the funding to do it. Look at this crap that they're talking about. The researchers also do not rule out potential factors, other potential factors beyond mate preference, including demographic imbalances, such as a shortage of Neanderthal women or an abundance of human women. Okay, that still sounds like the same thing. Well, just too many human women. So Neanderthals were like, oh yeah, can we have your excess, please? Sorry. Yeah, because that's how they spoke. Yeah, because they couldn't speak. Or maybe they sign languaged it, because they probably, let's be honest, actually, Neanderthals probably had the highest form of sign language. It was probably like space sign language, because they were so impressive. And I imagine, actually, here's really what happened. I've got it all wrong. What happened is there was an overflow of human women. Okay, and the Neanderthals saw that overflow of human women. So what they did is the Neanderthal men all get together and they painted these beautiful Rembrandt canvases, okay, like just top-notch artistry. And they would paint the portrait of the human woman that they desired. And they would come and they would hold the portrait over the head. And the human woman would be like, oh, they'll be melting and they'll be gushing, and then there'll be a massive wedding. That's what happened. And they'll find the artwork as well. This is how Neanderthal men tempted the human women over their inferior Homo sapien males, their useless African brutes. Yeah, they also wrote poetry without speaking. So they wrote poetry but couldn't recite it because they couldn't speak. So it was just like, it was just a line of G's. Go 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 go. Yeah, okay, man. All right, cool. So notice how all of these different other potential things, none of them involve violence, which we know the Neanderthal was very capable of. None of them involve non-consensuals, which we know is probably the most likely. They won't even consider it. No, because they're not our uncles. No way. The purely demographic models seem a little less tenuous to us, says Platt. We sort of now at least prefer the model that has mate preference as being a driving factor. Well, of course you do. Of course you do. Because you probably think that women prefer your species and you see yourself closely related to your Neanderthal ancestors. Yeah, cool. Lars Faren Schmitz, an anthropology professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, who was not involved in the study, says he's not surprised to see potential evidence of mate preference in Netherlands, given its prevalence in human history. I told you, isn't that what I just said? Isn't that what I just said? Look at us in Netherlands. If you come to the Netherlands, yeah, we are very, very tall. Very tall, very tall. And I imagine the Neanderthal stand like us, very tall, and attracting the woman. Okay, man. It's been a major restrictive factor for our own species throughout our existence, says Ferhan Schmitz. Matilda Brindle, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Oxford, who was not involved in the study, agrees. Oh, she agrees. She previously published research suggesting that Neanderthals and modern humans may have shared prehistoric kisses. So they'd be smooching. The idea of mate preference driving this bias is certainly compelling. Man, these Neanderthal men were smooth with it. They weren't smooth enough to prevent their extinction. They weren't smooth enough to prevent. They couldn't smooth their way out of that. But you know, oh Lord, this is going to be a hard one to get through. Let's carry on. Such a theory, she adds, raises. Oh, someone said black screen. Let me know when I'm back, guys. If it keeps blacking out, let me know when I'm back. Can't stand this thing. It's really annoying. Just put it in the chat that the stream is working again. Anyone, just put a sentence in the chat so I know that the stream's working, and I'll continue. This is annoying. Okay, someone said they can see. I'm going to carry on. Such a theory, she adds, raises questions about how sparks flew between the two species. What was it about Neanderthal males that modern human females found so sexy, or vice versa? So can you see how it's gone from postulation to, yeah, this is absolutely what it was. There was absolutely no rape, absolutely no kidnapping, absolutely nothing non-consensual. Consensual. There's absolutely nothing else. This is just, ancient ancient love at first sight. They just so used to see the Neanderthal men bathing in the bogs, no gogo, and they're, oh my god, they're so hot. Yeah, okay, man. That's good lord, these people just run with their nonsense, don't they? Platt says he hopes that geneticists like himself will be able to aid evolutionary biologists. Of course he does. And anthropologists in finding the answers to these questions. So now they've already decided that it's true. What they need to find the answer is, we've moved on. We've given you the theory, the thesis. Yeah. The thesis is that Neanderthal men and human women found each other attractive. You can't argue with that anymore. So now the only question we need to answer is why. That's the only question we need to answer. Why? Why do they find each other so attractive? So we have tenuous genetic data, which could still be correct in that those genes you're looking for have just been selected out. Okay, and there wasn't actually any kind of like male-female preference. But then we have all of the other probabilities, which are much higher, because those are show patterns in human history. In fact, I think the Yamnaya expansion has a similar male to female ratio if I remember correctly, where it's the male lineage. Someone correct me if I'm incorrect. The male lineage, the Y DNA that's preserved, okay, which shows that it was a male expansion. It was the males because they were a violent group that were good at finding, oppressing, erasing, but taking on the women. But that's all different now. Yeah, that's all different now. When when it comes to Neanderthals are just smooth with it. Yeah, Neanderthals just they just came with the with the patins and the and the ugging and the grunting. You know what I mean? Probably used to walk around naked because no. What am I talking about? They were probably the first to wear clothes. I'd imagine Neanderthals were dressed in fine knitted linens and came Nugugu. Nungugu. Mungugu. Nungugu. Showing off their fine Neanderthal clothes. And the woman is like, oh my God, they look so much better than our guys. Platt says he hopes genetics like himself will be able to aid evolutionary biologists and anthropologists in finding the answers to these questions. It's something geneticists haven't fully explored, he says, but we can contribute to this story. A story is what it is. Yeah, a made up story. So there you go. There's a study to this, which I could go through, but I'm honestly not that interested at this stage. I may revisit this and do a longer video, but I don't. Here's the honest truth, guys. Yeah, we petty. That's 100% truth. Yeah, smooth ooga booga. Sorry, okay, some joke. Look, here's the honest truth, guys. I don't care to debunk this. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of share it with you. We're not going. I spend my time. We spend our time researching African history, researching our history, researching our ancestors. What I'm not going to do is spend my time debunking their myths. I think that's more a thing that their grifters like to do when it comes to African history. They like to try and debunk anything that Afrocentric said. Me, I don't care. Let them, if they want to believe that, Neanderthal was a Chad. Neanderthal was just a hot Chad, a hot, intelligent, art making, smooth talking, smooth grunting, singing, well dressed Chad who the human women just couldn't resist. Let him have at it. I just don't care. I do not care. Yeah, I don't care. Let them have at it. It's honestly, I've moved on from this. I just want to have a bit of a laugh at their expense. How ridiculous this is. Absolutely ridiculous. So yeah. I think you're correct on this account as well, because we know white skin is very new. 6,000 years was what they used to say. I think they've now stretched this back to around 10, but I still think 3 to 6 is more realistic for the expansion of white skin. If we've got to look historically and anthropologically at it. But you said here, yeah, at least they depict Neanderthals with melanin, which they did have because white skin is new. I don't think they depict it maybe with enough melanin. And I'm not here trying to defend Neanderthals, but yeah, get the depiction right. Yeah, because the fact of the matter is, if what you're saying is true, which I believe to be true, these people would have originally been a melanated species, okay, before isolation. And I've got lots of theories about why and the conditions that were conducive to white skin. If you want to look at it, you probably need to look at nocturnal creatures and creatures that live underground who pick up a similar kind of trait. And they did find underground caves in Turkey, in that region. So there's a lot of kind of like historical probabilities as to why pale skin became dominant amongst certain groups. But that's another discussion. We don't have to talk about that right now. Let's move on, because there was a couple things I want to cover today. I did want to cover this one, but I feel like I'll come back to it. There was a study about Iberia, where they found these bones from Iberians, but I wanted to go, because of the time, we're like nearly an hour in, I want to go straight to, I don't want to be on like all evening here, I want to go straight to the Beachy Head Lady study. The reason I want to go on to that is because we have a bit of a backstory to that. Give me a shout in the chat if you were present the first time we cover, the live stream I did on Beachy Head Lady. Just let me know. Okay, let me know if you're present in that live stream, because that's a really good place to start. And I would advise you, if you're on this live stream and you do want a bit of background information about some of these topics we're talking about, I would advise you to watch that video that I did on DNA and ascertainment bias. I think that's a very important video to watch. And I also advise you to go back and watch the video that we did on Beachy Head Woman, because it will answer a lot of the things here. So some of the things here I'm gonna just say, but you have to kind of like do a little bit of a trust me, bro, in that we've already been through the study on a previous video. So if I say something, it's because it's something that we've already gone through, and I don't want to keep referring to other stuff because we'll just be here all day. Okay, so yeah, but there's been a lot of work done on Beachy Head and Beachy Head Woman, and the various bones they keep finding in the British Isles have been a massive problem, because Britain has, as you've probably noticed with the recent BAFTA awards debacle that took place, Britain is a very racist country. But what Britain does a lot better than America is dog whistling. Okay, British racism is like the oldest form. You know, British racism is the original racism. So you have to understand, you guys in America and you guys in all the different parts of the world, you're getting second generation racism. Yeah, you're getting that kind of like racism that's kind of like been through a process, you know, and that process is brought out different. But in Britain, you get that original version 1 racism. Yeah, they are masters. When I say masters at dog whistling, and also they don't care about racism. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? They don't care about racism here. They don't care. It doesn't exist. Yeah. There's no such thing. Do you understand that? Racism? You should be grateful you're here. Yeah. They don't care. So it's been very, very difficult for Britain. I'm going to talk a bit about Britain as an entity here, because this spans across academia and media and all the various kind of like verticals in which people, develop, their kind of like epistemology. And what's been incredibly problematic for them is they keep bringing up dubious bones where they don't want to. Beachy Head Woman is important. Ivory Lady is important. Cheddar Man is important. These important bones that they keep bringing up aren't giving them back white people. That's essentially the problem. Yeah, these important bones that they keep bringing up on the British Isles, these ancient bones, aren't giving them white people, and they have been convinced for the longest time that they are the first people in the UK. They think that it's all of their ancestors and they're just part of a lineage. Whereas if you just go back a couple hundred years, Dr. Onyeka Nubia has this fantastic quote, which I can never remember word for word. And what's funny about this quote is it was said 3 times by 3 different people, one of them being the Venerable Bard. I can't remember the other 2, but it was basically along the lines of, we don't know. It's impossible for us to ever find out who the original people of Britain were, who the original populations of Britain were. And this was said by 3 different people over different time spans, because the population of Britain at that time knew that their arrival was around 700 AD. They know the arrival of the people we call modern Brits, yeah, is a recent arrival. They know that, but they're also unwilling to accept that they're not the first people here. So we're in this place where people in Britain, look, being here for 1300 years, yeah, is pretty decent innings. Do you understand what I mean? It's like, no one's gonna call you a foreigner. You flipping run the world. But the thing about these people is that they're not happy with that. They're not happy with the truth, even if the truth says you've only been here for 1,000+ years. They're not happy with that. They always want everything. So they want to be these older populations, even though they know those older populations aren't them. It's been proven genetically, it's proven physically, it's proven biologically, it's proven culturally, on every front. You know that these people aren't you, but they must have, do you understand? They must have everything. They are so unwilling to accept what their actual history is. And that's the problem. Okay. Let's read this, because many of you would have seen. Oh, let's talk about Beachy Head really quickly before I dive into the article. So to give a bit of a background, Beachy Head women, when they discovered Beachy Head women, obviously they just had the skulls, the physical proportions, and the one thing that the anthropologists agreed with about Beachy Head women is physically, phenotypically, they are dealing with an African. Okay, they're dealing with someone who had African proportions, and I mean overtly African, because if it wasn't overt, then they would have ignored it from the start, and they would have just said, "Oh, you know, if it was just what you're seeing on the screen, you know, a white woman with thick lips," then they would have never raised the possibility of them being an African. But the phenotype and the expression of Beachy Head women's features were so outside of the European range of expression, and we are going to cover exactly what that is as well, because it's actually written in the study exactly how Beachy Head woman presents, that they knew this is someone of African ancestry. Only Africans present these physical proportions. Now, as a result of that, and this is where they play their very, very clever game of semantics, they say, Beachy Head woman, sub-Saharan African. Did she have sub-Saharan African ancestry? It's like, oh, well, wait a second. We're not claiming that. It's not necessary for her to be sub-Saharan African. Yeah. If we understand that historically all humans originate from the African continent, okay, and then spread out throughout the world, at least that's the tale that you tell us, then this person could just be expressing African features. They could be a black person, someone who physically aligns with the modern black population. So they might physically look like a black person, but their ancestry could be 1, 2, 10, 100, 500 indigenous to that population. That's how many generations they could be there. You can't just say because they present as a, but this is the thing, what they're trying to do when they say sub-Saharan African, what they're trying to paint is this idea, which is reverse to the science that they know, that sub-Saharan Africans have always stayed in Africa. Europeans came out of a sub-Saharan Africans or black person's ballsack. Yeah, excuse my French, but that's how it worked. It's never going to work the other way around. So on the one hand, they know the science says that Africans spread out throughout the world and continue to spread and continue to spread. That's what the science says. But their arrogance says sub-Saharan Africans didn't actually move. So if we find a black person and they're not in Africa, how did they get there? It's like, what do you friggin' mean? How did they get there, you dumbasses? What do you mean sub-Saharan? You know that everybody is a result of Africans moving out of Africa. And you also don't want to accept the fact that Africans moved out of Africa, and that means you're going to find Africans everywhere, or people who physically look like black people. And this is the hole that they dug for themselves because they are racist. So anyway, I've gone on the side note, side quest. The point being that this Beachy Head woman is an example of African physical phenotype presenting itself. Undoubtedly, they know they're dealing. Otherwise, it would have never come up. And so they did a reconstruction of her, but when they did the reconstruction, they made her look as little, you know, as as mildly African as possible. And in fact, I'll show you the reconstruction because it doesn't even look like an African when they made it. So they acknowledge, oh, this is a black woman. But when they do the reconstruction, they do that whole cope thing. So let me just quickly show you what the original reconstruction looked like. It barely looks like an African. Okay, so then they made this reconstruction. Okay, this is the original one, yeah, which barely looks like, I mean, come on, yeah, this is them already coping. Okay, so they're already coping with this reconstruction. Let me just make that a bit bigger for you so you can see this. This is already a huge cope. Okay, absolutely ridiculous. You can see they're trying to hide African features behind what is a kind of like southern European North African phenotype, and they always reach for North Africa because this is another one of their semantic games. Just like they'll say sub-Saharan African, they will also say, well, the African DNA could be North African. And it's kind of like, well, you know, it's not modern North African. It might be ancient North African, which is just black people once again, but it's African. You already know that. But they'll play around with the word African as much as possible. It becomes very, very elastic because nothing they do is honest. They're constantly moving goalposts and playing with semantics for their own benefit. So that's what she looked like originally. All right. And then, you know, they did an initial genetic test. So let me give you a little bit more history. Their initial genetic test that they did on her found that she carried some Greek ancestry, but also some unknown African ancestry. That's what the initial genetic test said. So what happened is when they did the final study, they said, well, let's ignore this unknown African ancestry because it's unknown. So there's no point in even talking about it and say, well, she's Greek, she's not sub-Saharan African. And they made a plaque for her saying she was sub-Saharan African just so they could take it down and say she wasn't sub-Saharan African. She was actually European, fully European. Like, these people are crazy. Only you guys said she was sub-Saharan African. No one was claiming that. But they know if they remove that sub-Saharan African label, what they're trying to do is say she wasn't black. And it's like, no, she was still black. You can't change the woman's bones, you friggin' numpties. She was still a black woman. And when I say a black woman, I mean, she still was a physically someone who would belong on the African continent. So that's where they left off until this latest study. So now that I've given you a little bit of the backstory, probably in a very bad way, let's go through the study together. Okay, let's go through the study together. Feel free, by the way, guys, please hit up the likes. Okay, let's get some likes going, get a bit of positive activity going. If you're enjoying it, we've got nearly 200 in the stream. So please hit up the likes if you're enjoying the stream. Many people can come. Feel free to leave a leave a super chat as well and leave a comment so I can read that out for you. Let's carry on. So let's start. DNA disproves widely repeated theories about the beachy head woman. So you can already see disproves widely repeated theories. By the way, they created their own straw man argument here. Yeah, created their own straw man. Sub-Saharan. No one ever said beachy head woman was a sub-Saharan African. Only they did because they're racist. And then they blew down their own straw man argument, which no one raised in the first place. Just like Cheddar Man. No one's saying he's sub-Saharan African, but the dude black, isn't it? Deal with it. Deal with the fact that he's black. He looks like me. Okay. The Beachy Head woman study shows a 2,000-year-old skeleton at Beachy Head in southern England belonged to a local woman in Roman Britain. Okay. Now, we already know she was a local woman from the first study because they did the isotope analysis, guys. Yeah. What the isotope analysis is, it looks at teeth and bones, and it gets an idea of what that person's diet was and what their environment was. So isotope analysis is very useful for understanding where a person was raised. And by the way, the isotope analysis is something that they try to use also to disprove the sub-Saharan ancestry. Oh, well, she wasn't raised in Africa. No one said she was raised in Africa. I wasn't. If you did an isotope analysis on me, yeah, guess what it would bring back? It would bring back the fact that I'm British. It would bring back the fact that I was raised here. It would bring back the fact that I ate British food. Am I white? Yeah. Am I blonde? No. Yeah. I'm still a black person of African ancestry. Isotope analysis proves nothing in terms of ancestry, but this is how cuckoo these people are. Let's carry on. A London museum team used newer DNA and chemistry tests to revisit a debate that shaped public views of ancient migration. Now, the London Museum is I think it's the Natural History Museum, and that's who Selena Brace works for. Now, Selena Brace is the geneticist who did Cheddar Man study. I don't think she was involved in the initial Beachy Head woman study though, but she did the Cheddar Man study. And I used to have a lot of respect for her. And unfortunately, it feels like she's gone the way of the corrupted Neanderthal. I don't know, but it's really sad because I always liked everything that she said up until now. Everything of what she's saying now sounds so like so stupid and unplausible. You're like, how are these people getting to them? It's ridiculous. Let me give a quick shout out to Kieran Grant. He says like and sub. Whitey people, white people in again. He say he means YouTube. YouTube people in again. And thank you very much for the $5 donation. And thank you very much, Nata, for your 50 Swedish krona. He says salute, respect to you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, guys. Let's carry on. Faster sequencing and bigger reference data sets reopened the Beachy Head woman study after early tests left too much uncertainty. Now, reference data sets, guys, I want you to pay attention to that, because straight away now your alarm bell should be ringing. They're talking here about genotyping arrays, and these are the things that introduce ascertainment bias, which I spoke about in that video. So if you haven't watched that video, once again, I advise you to watch that video, because it'll make you understand how this is actually a big part of what's kind of gone awry in this study. Let's carry on. The work was led by Dr. Selina Brace at the Natural History Museum in London. Her research uses bones and genomes, complete sets of DNA instructions to test how people moved during Roman rule. Naming the Beachy Head woman, a cardboard box was found in Eastbourne Town Hall. A cardboard box found in Eastbourne Town Hall held a skeleton labeled Beachy Head with notes pointing to the 1950s. Missing excavation notes forced scientists to rely on radiocarbon dating, which is measuring carbon decay to estimate age from a small bone sample. The range of Common Era 129 to 311, that's AD 129 to 311, meaning the years 129 to 311 of the Common Era, comes from calibration curve that translates radiocarbon measurements into calendar dates. So they just basically carbon dated the bones, and they found out that they was dated from somewhere between the 2nd and 4th century. Bone measurements from the skull suggested sub-Saharan African roots. Once again, very clear there, guys. Can you see what they're doing there? Yeah. Sub-Saharan African, a loaded statement that we don't use. Okay. They could have just said, first of all, African roots, but really what they're trying to say here is that she had the bones of a modern black person. Now, modern black people aren't currently restricted to the sub-Sahara, and there's no evidence that modern black people were historically restricted to the sub-Sahara. In fact, there's not a single century in history that you can look anywhere in this world and you won't find black people, and not just some of them, a lot of them. So why geographically restrict us to the sub-Sahara? Because it's a part of their racist talk points. Okay, even to this day, black people are pretty much the only population who are intra-Sahara, that's inside the Sahara, and actually still well represented even above the Sahara, although at a minority now, because people who are coastal Europeans, coastal Africans are highly admixed with Slavic, Balkan, Turkic ancestry, which is why, you know, they look different to the modern African population. But this is a nonsense term, sub-Saharan African. Okay, and we wholly reject it. But they are suggesting that the skull that they've brought up is a black person. That's the one thing that they're sure. This is the skull of an African. It's not the skull of a European, and it has very telling points about that. And the idea quickly spread through books, classrooms, and exhibits by them, because once again, they'll use that as a straw man they can blow down later. That approach used craniofacial morphology, comparing skull shapes across reference groups, yet traits overlap widely across human populations. False. False. Okay. What's going on there? I'll just hit wait. False. This is the thing. If you saw a live stream I did many years ago, I think it was called the phenotypic matrices, which sounds like a entirely convoluted word salad kind of like thing, but it was a live stream that I did when I talked about the fact that only amongst Africans can you find the complete array, the complete gamut of human phenotypic diversity. We have all of the head shapes from, you know, long to very square. We have all of the nose shapes from very narrow to very broad. We have all of the body proportions or body plans. Whereas what you find in modern Europeans and modern non-Africans, modern Europeans and modern Asians, is they have subsets of African phenotype. So they'll be restricted in their nose width from this to this. They'll be restricted in their lip size from this to this. They'll be restricted in their body proportions from this to this. They'll be restricted in their skull shape from this to this. They don't have the entire range, whereas Africans do. So what happens is it becomes very, very easy to rule Europeans out. It's much harder to rule African ancestry out than it is European ancestry. And what you had with Beachy Head Woman is you had a skull and a physical body plan that sat outside of the European range. This is the cope. Oh yeah, there's loads of overlap. Yes, that is true. There is a lot of overlap. Okay, but this one was outside of the range that modern Europeans present. It was outside of the range. The only people that had that combination of features can be found on the African continent. So what they'll try and do is they'll try and completely discredit and discard the whole idea of craniofacial morphology and physical phenotype to ascertain ancestry. They're going to try and discard that entirely so they can do their little plasticine of sticking cream clay on a black African body, you know, black African skull. Let's just move that over here and we'll make this make-believe nose and these make-believe features, and yeah, here you go, here's a white person. Like, it's like, come on, you know that's not a European. You know that, but this is what they do. You know, they've got carte blanche to manipulate this data as much as possible. So because this field of craniofacial morphology is not favorable to them, like I said, they keep digging up people who are clearly and identifiably black people in places they've said black people never were. They now have to just say, oh, well, physical phenotypes, what are you talking about? That's phrenology. This is Hitler. This is racism. We don't want any of that. The genetics will tell us everything we need to know. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of like debunk that, this kind of like oversimplification about widely, you know, overlap. Yes, well, overlap does exist, but that's because of Africans, okay, more than anything. Once the skeleton became a symbol of early African presence, later corrections had to compete with a familiar public story. A symbol of early African presence? No, it's a symbol that the first settlers in the UK, or the early settlers in the UK, were black, which actually agrees with your science. Yeah, you're the ones who came up with the out of Africa theory. Yeah, we didn't create that, you did. You said everyone came out of Africa. Why are you now? Because they have to believe that everyone who came out of Africa all took part in this inter Neanderthal crossbreeding that took place, and then they all traveled together and they all did this and they all did that, which is total nonsense. A small group did that. Your ancestors did that crossbreeding, yeah, with the Neanderthal. But there were other Africans who came onto the European continent and didn't do that. They retained their African features. They retained their African ancestry. They retained their 0 to trace amounts of Neanderthal ancestry. They retained all of that. That's why they're there. But they don't ever want to think along those lines. They have to simplify history to the most stupid extent to give themselves the oldest possible existence when they know that this is not them. They know that this is not their ancestry. It's very desperate. Let's carry on. New DNA analysis tools arrived. Years later, lab teams could recover far more ancient DNA, genetic material preserved in long dead cells, than earlier tests managed. Researchers drilled powder from the dense petrous bone and then used targeted capture to pull out key human markers. Better recovery mattered because early fragments once hinted at cypress, yet low coverage can mislead when too few sites read clearly. Now it's interesting now that they're making that admission, okay? Because when they released she's from Cyprus, she's not sub-Saharan African, even though we found African ancestry, get rid of that plaque, she's European. Remember, they said that with aplomb. They didn't say, oh, well, this low coverage can mislead and lead to, we could have got this wrong. Yeah, and actually that African ancestry that we discarded could be quite important. No, they didn't say any of that. They just said she's from Cyprus. Get rid of that plaque. She's not black. Yeah, that's what they did. So they can't even obey their own rules. Remember, we just literally talked about the fact that they'll keep these little things secret until it's time to release them, till it comes convenient to tell the truth. Then they'll say, "Oh yeah, we was never too sure when we did the initial DNA study. You know, it was really low coverage, wasn't very good." Oh, that's convenient that you're admitting that now, isn't it? Let's carry on. Before ancestry results mean anything, labs must show these sequences are truly old and not modern mix-ups. Damage patterns at fragment ends, plus low contamination, modern DNA accidentally added to samples helped authenticate the remains. At Natural History Museum, those checks set boundaries and confidence, especially when one person is used to represent a whole community, which is pseudoscience in itself. They shouldn't do that. You should never have the case where one person is being used to represent a whole community. That's absolutely ridiculous. You know how many people in your community you have no ancestral relationship to? It's absolutely ridiculous. That is pseudoscientific to the fullest. But you know, these geneticists do whatever the hell they want and get away with it. Particularly in Africa, yeah, where they know they have this really, really high rate of genetic diversity, where two people in the same village can be more distantly related than either one of them and a European. They know that. They know that, but they don't care. Yeah, they did. We found this one person. They are a representation of the entire population. It's like that. That's not how you should be using the science. I thought you guys were the academics here. Why am I telling you why there's so many things wrong with that approach? It's absolutely ridiculous. Let's carry on. Bone and teeth chemistry. Chemical clues in teeth track where a person spent childhood because enamel locks in local water signatures. So we're talking about the isotope analysis here. The team measured isotopes, atoms of the same element with different weights in tooth enamel and bone collagen. Values matched Britain's south coast ranges. Yeah, well, that's where she was found. So that makes sense. No one was saying that she was a foreigner, unless you're a racist anthropologist or a racist geneticist like these guys are. So listen to this next sentence, guys. So long distance childhood migration looked unlikely for this individual. Well, who said she was a long distance childhood migration? Who even raised that as a possibility? Am I a long distance childhood migration? Or you black fella? What banana boat did you hop here from? How did you get here? What coast did you swim here from? I was born, mate. I was born in Hammersmith. Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I didn't have long distance childhood migration either. Carbon and nitrogen signals in bone collagen hint at what someone ate over years, not just days, that we talked about already. Higher nitrogen values fit a seafood heavy menu, and that aligns with life spent near the Channel coastline. Diet data can be noisy, but the pattern supported other evidence for coastal upbringing and routine local movement. Cool. We're happy with that. That makes sense. Okay. She was local. Yep. No one was arguing with that to begin with. Skeletal features placed her age at death between 18 and 25 years, a narrow window for such old remains. Stature estimates put her about 5 feet, and leg healing showed survival after a serious wound. Because bones rarely reveal cause of death, the Beachy-Head Woman study focused on lived experience rather than a final moment. Where genes clustered. So let's carry on now. Where genes clustered. Large comparison data sets let scientists see which groups share the most genetic variants, even when samples are incomplete. Her ancestry pattern aligned with rural southern Britain, and the results matched many modern people from England. Now we're going to look into this and see how they've come to this. And you're going to see, once again, the genotyping arrays. Now also, remember what we're talking about here. Descent, okay, descent is not equal to ancestry, okay? Let me qualify that. Descent is not equal to ancestry. You have no control over your descendants, and your descendants give zero indication of who you are. Okay, maybe for like 2 generations, but once your descendants are like 50 generations away from you, That gives us zero indication of who you were. Okay, I can't tell anybody who's on this live stream, no genetic, no one can tell what race your great, 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 your mother's father's mother's father's mother's father's father was. Okay, no one can tell that. Right, you might carry a trace amount of the ancestry, but no one can tell what race they were. No one could tell how they looked. So, is it likely that the population that she was from, we know she was from like between the second and the fourth century, is it likely that her and the population she was from interbred with those who came in and had offspring? Yes, it's logical. It's absolutely logical. Once again, it doesn't prove anything about who she was. It doesn't change her from an African or from someone who physically looks like a black person to something else. Okay, let's carry on. Predicting visible traits carefully. Pigmentation predictions draw. What's it? Did I read the rest of that? Okay, no, I didn't read the rest of it. So her ancestry pattern aligned with rural southern Britain, and the results matched with many modern people from England. No clear signal pointed towards recent African or Eastern Mediterranean ancestry, narrowing the range of plausible life histories. Okay. So they're saying basically because they found people who possibly descended from group or people similar to her in Britain, and they didn't find people with that kind of like descent in Africa or the Mediterranean, that tells us that she must have looked like and been a modern Brit, which is reverse logic. Do you understand that? That's logic in reverse. Yeah, that's it doesn't prove anything about who she is. Let's carry on. Predicting visible traits carefully. Pigmentation predictions draw on gene variants tied to eye, hair, and skin traits, and they come with uncertainty. The team used phenotype outward traits shaped by genes and environment markers to suggest blue eyes, light hair, and intermediate skin. And we're going to go through that as well and what this means exactly. A revised digital face model followed those cues, yet bones still set most facial shapes and fine details stay unknown. Okay, so we'll have a look at all that shortly. Why skull traits can mislead. Excuse me, sorry about that, guys. Skull, so this is the thing. So you can see now, I haven't gone through all of that, yeah. So they've talked about skull shape, they've talked about isotope analysis, they've talked about genetic ancestry, they've talked about all of those things. And what's the one thing that they're going to come back and they're going to debunk? Have 3 guesses. Well, we can see here the skull traits. Oh well, the skull traits must be wrong. Why the skull traits can be misleading? Let's have a look. Skull-based ancestry labels, which by the way only you guys created, because no one says you're sub-Saharan apart from you. Skull-based ancestry labels often assume clear boundaries, even though genetic differences usually grade smoothly across regions. Once again, straw man argument. Okay. Oh well, skull-based ancestry, you're either black, like you're making a Seligman, kind of a Blumenbach argument here. Oh no, the issue is you found a skull and it phenotypically clustered with people that we know carry African ancestry. That's who it phenotypically clustered with. And now you're saying, well, because these people just like put people in groups, that it's no good, we can't use it. A professional statement notes that clinal gradual change across geography over many generations patterns make rigid skull categories unreliable. No one made those rigid skull categories, once again, apart from you. It was a very simple thing to look at the skull features and say this person definitely is phenotypically aligned with this population. Using multiple lines of evidence can correct these errors, but only if researchers stay open about uncertainty and revision. So right now they're setting the cope, yeah. they are creating and setting the cope for turning beachy head woman into a white woman. That's what they're doing here. They're laying the groundwork for you. They're like, yeah, we're finna we're finna put some blonde hair, blue eyes, creamy skin, and a thin nose on that skull, that African skull. That's what they're basically saying. Yeah? They are priming you for what's about to take place here. So it says here, Beachy Head woman and Roman Britain. Roman Britain drew people from many places because the empire moved soldiers, traders, and families along its road and ports. It also seemed to bring a lot of people who were clearly physically African to to the UK. Let's carry on, or I should say to the British shores. Archaeologists have documented long distance newcomers through burials, objects, and isotopes showing that mobility was part of daily life. The Beachy Head woman study therefore narrows one biography, not the wider history of movement during Roman rule. They said just a minute ago that they were using her to decide what the whole population was like, and now they're saying, anyway, let's carry on. Once an identity story lands in a gallery, it shapes how visitors see the past and each other. So it's important that essentially we get on top. Okay, it's important that we get on top of this, yeah, because this is shaping how people are going to see the past. Okay, they can't be seeing a past where a black woman is sitting right in the middle of British history. She's had quite a journey, said Dr. Brace. And this is Dr. Brace, who I like, by the way. After the new results arrived, clear labels about methods and limits help avoid turning tentative inferences into permanent facts that outlive new evidence. Together, genetics, isotopes, and bone biology show how this woman likely grew up despite years of debate. Future work will test other disputed skeletons with similar multi-method checks, whilst museums update displays without erasing past uncertainty. Well, it did take you long to get rid of that she was sub-Saharan African plaque, did it? Got rid of that one in a hurry. Well, let's cool. That's the article that I want to read for you. This is on earth.com, and I want to go through the study now. Now, I hope this isn't too dry for you guys, because I think looking at the data provided by the study is really, really informative, because we want to know how they essentially got from A to B. Okay, and as much as some of these methods, excuse me, as much as some of these methods might be very tentative, very copy, others might be very legitimate, and we have to acknowledge what looks legitimate alongside what doesn't look legitimate. It's important that we don't cope like, you know, they do so often. Okay, so let's go through this now. I'm only going to pick out certain parts. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a study, and as you can imagine, it goes on for quite some time. But we're going to look at certain parts that have led to them making certain decisions. Okay, so let's go through together. We already know the dates, blah blah blah. Let's just read here. Here we present the results of an bioanthropological and let me see if I can zoom in actually a bit. There you go. So if you want to read along now, that should be a bit clearer now. Here we present the results of all bioanthropological and biomolecular analyses formed to date. Initial osteological analyses indicated possible sub-Saharan origin, once again, straw man that they created, with Beachy Head woman thus presented as one of the earliest Africans in Britain. That was a total straw man. No one was suggesting that. They found her skull and she was black. No one said she was African. It's only you guys who are so against the idea that there was anyone black, which you guys know that the white people who arrived, the modern Brits, you know they're foreigners. You know that for a fact. But you never question if you find a white skull. It's like, oh, that's what we expect because all the ancient Brits were white. It's like, where did you get that from? There's no historical source to support that. So you're remember what I said earlier about the fact that they rely on historical tropes to dictate how they determine what they find and how they determine anthropology. So rather than just what they should be doing as professional anthropologists, digging this up and going, this person looks like a black person, you know, people who we, you know, refer to in modern times as Africa. So we know there were black people here at this time in history, and leaving it at that, they straight away start going, oh, sub-Saharan African origin. When did she come over? Oh, she must have just been the only one amongst a field of white people. But they don't have anything to support that. All they have is a false history. So this is the problem that we have. Let's carry on. Her story was complicated by a subsequent unpublished biomolecular analysis, which suggested she likely grew up in the south coast of Britain and had recent European ancestry. Here we present high quality ancient DNA, indicating the beachy-head woman had a strong genetic affinity to individuals from rural Britain during the Roman occupation and the modern day Britons. We find no signal of admixture that would suggest recent sub-Saharan ancestry. Once again, recent sub-Saharan ancestry, and this is not something we're arguing for. You'll know from being on this channel that I argue for the fact that Black people are indigenous to every continent, and therefore you should expect to find Black people on every continent. It's logical and it marries very well with what we know about the human story of migration across the planet. Phenotypic predictions suggested she had blue eyes, intermediate between pale and dark skin pigmentation, and light hair. Now, what you'll notice is that they're admitting there that her skin was between pale and dark. Did that reconstruction look like it had between pale and dark skin? Could you be more pale than that? So once again, this is the handiwork of Caroline Wilkinson, by the way. And she did exactly the same thing with Neurat Man. Okay. They were told he had somewhere between dark to black and dark skin, which is both in the black range in a high-risk plex model, but she chose to make him intermediate. And then someone who they found who's intermediate, they've chose to make pale. Okay. I mean, she's so pale, she's got freckles. So they know, on the one hand, they present something and then they just completely ignore it. And that's not the first time they've done that. But let's carry on. Combined, our multi-proxy approach indicates that Beachy Head woman was of local British ancestry. So this goes over where she was found. Beachy Head. I'm not going to read everything. Some of them I'm going to skip over. I'm just going to kind of like stop at certain parts. Olusoga, that was the guy who did the documentary. So if you haven't seen it, there was a documentary about Beachy Head woman, and then he was kind of like involved in the first reconstruction that was made when they're like, oh, they found her. She's she's black. This is a black skull. She looks like a black woman. She looks like an African, and then they made this. So they decided she was one thing, and then they totally ignored it when they made the reconstruction. But go figure. Let me quickly just read out a comment before I continue. Thank you very much, Kieran Grant. He says, remember when actin 3 gene was linked to speed and strength? They found 80% of Black people had it. Like 30 seconds later, a flurry of studies were putting out claiming it's mostly in whites and not Blacks. They do this all the time. I always frequently talk about the fact that when they first started doing kind of like broad genetic testing, all Europeans, and when I say all Europeans were coming up admixed ancestry with African. Okay. All Europeans from England, blonde hair, blue eyes, brunette hair, whatever, they would all have around 20%, some of them higher. Yeah, you're 20% African, you're this African, you're that African. And then as time came on, or as time proceeded, all of those African markers, those genes that they associated with Africa, they reclassified those. Oh no, they're in Africa, but it was a result of a back migration. These are European genes. And the way they classified that is by volume. Loads of people have it here, but only a few people have it in Africa. And therefore, ignoring Africa's genetic diversity will say that it belongs to this area. Now, and this is why people take genetic tests and they come out, I always say, like, how is it possible that anybody comes out 100% European? Isn't that impossible? Like, what are we doing here? It should be impossible to be 100% British, because that means that the British human genome was solely isolated and sprung up in Britain, and all your ancestors never left and just remained in Britain. We know that's not how history went. We know when the modern Britons arrived in Britain. Okay, so where is your ancestry from? What date are we relating this back to? They make up stuff as they go along. It's absolute nonsense. Let me quickly read Nerd Large's comment because give me a fantastic donation, $20. Thank you very much, sir. Said, observe how the Madagascar ancestry narrative changed, for example. First, they said Austronesian settlers imported Bantu slaves from mainland Africa. After analyzing haplogroups, the Bantu slave narrative looks shaky. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is, they always pick the narratives that's least complementary of the capability of Africans. So they'll always pick an explanation for how they're interpreting DNA in the way that is literally the most, you know, deriding of the African population, but on top reinforces the historic slave narrative. We must be slaves. The reality is slavery is very recent to modern Africans. It's very, very recent. We are not historic slaves. The historic slaves are the people of the Balkans, the Black Sea region, the people of Eastern Europe and West. Those are the slaves. Those are the slave hubs that remain slave hubs for thousands of years. And many modern Europeans have ancestry to that region. During a time when they were being taken as slaves, Africans weren't being taken as slaves. So this false slave narrative that they continually try to, thank you very much for $20, by the way, which they continually try to put onto Africans is a nonsense. It's a creation, it's a fiction of the mind. And it's a cope because they know what our real history is. And those of you who've been watching my recent videos also know they know what time it is. They know what time it is. So they can push the slave narrative all they want, but they know we weren't slaves. They know that for sure. Let me read this. So beachy head woman's origins would soon garner public interest when results of early craniofacial analysis suggested she was of recent sub-Saharan ancestry. The discovery of the first Black Britons known to us by Olusoga gained traction across several media outlets, and they loved that because they loved that later they were able to tear that down along with that plaque. However, over the preceding decade, as further analysis of beachy head woman's remains were conducted, this interpretation began to shift. Let's carry on. So this talks about the sites and the samples. I don't think that's that relevant. So I'm just gonna kind of like stop at the points that I think are really, really important. Unless there's something like this huge you think I've missed, in which case you should probably do a super chat and let me know. I'm gonna kind of like stop at the parts that are important. So they talk here about the method of radiocarbon dating that's used, okay, and the bioarchaeological assessment. So this is looking at the body. I think it will probably include the, okay, so let's talk about the craniofacial analysis. In 2013, macroscopic craniofacial analysis was carried out at the University of Dundee to reconstruct BHW's appearance. The cranium was almost complete except for the loss of both maxillary and mandibular incisors and canines. So she's missing some teeth from the top and bottom rows. While some traits such as wide palate, mid-brow ridges, so wide palate, that's a African trait, mid-brow ridges and marked knuckle line were successive of a male cranial features, were overall indicative that the skull was female. The skull was dolichocephalic. So guys, listen here. Dolichocephalic with a cephalic index of 73. In modern European populations, that's a disability. Yeah, that's quite a strong, you know, level of dolichocephaly. That's a very normal expression in a African or African adjacent population. That's someone who has Black or mixed African ancestry with that kind of cephalic index without disability. Now, is it impossible for Europeans to have it? Once again, very uncommon. It's really outside the range of normality. Is there anything else to compound that? Post-pragmatic depression. That's another African marker. That's that little dip in the middle of your skull. Africans have that at around 40% or higher. Modern Europeans have it at around the 10% range. So now we've got two traits that place her probably outside of modern European population and more towards the African population. Rectangular orbits. That is almost, guys, this is exactly the same thing that happened in the New Rat study. Rectangular orbits, post-pragmatic depression in the skull, dolichocephalic. These are three. Now we got three conclusively African traits on the skull. 3, wide interorbital distance, low nasal root, okay, low nasal root, and absent nasal spine. Now, I don't know if that's absent for damage, but that, once again, we're looking at an African shaped nose. We're talking about a very flattish nose bridge, yeah, almost absent nasal spine, which seems to be reflected in the reconstruction, suggests that she has a very flat nose bridge. So this is almost overtly, I have quite a strong nose bridge, but once again, when you have people who have almost absent nose bridge, and it's kind of, that's very, very African. That's like strongly African. That's kind of like Khoisan kind of trait. So now we're looking at 4 in a row things that cluster with Africans. Now, could a European have one of these traits? Possibly, yeah. Maybe post-traumatic depression, yeah. Maybe by dolichocephaly, they could have it, yeah. The absent nasal spine is almost non-existent amongst them, but all of these traits in concert, all of these traits. What kind of a European is that? That's just someone that you've never seen before. But this is the thing, they're happy. And by the way, in knowing all of these traits, do you see any of those traits in display when they created this? Does anyone see any of those traits that they displayed when they created this? No. They've just done a complete and utter friggin' Wallace and Gromit job here. Just slap the plasticine on. And said, oh yeah, no, she just looked like a normal white girl. It's like, did you not read the traits that I just read out there? It's absolutely ludicrous how they know something and just ignore it. Let's carry on. Nasal guttering, moderate prognathism. Here we go again. That's another one. So she was prognathic. She had a flat nose bridge. Yeah, she has a wide nose, by the way, a wide nasal passage. So prognathic, wide nasal passage, flat nose bridge, BNED, and post-traumatic depression on the skull. Yeah, she got all of these traits, which unequivocally, visually, many of you are seeing right now. Someone, Yoruba, Khoisan, like just someone in Africa somewhere. Yeah, but they're gonna convince you that this wasn't a black person. Rounded mandibular border and shallow coronoid notch. These details were found to be consistent with an individual of sub-Saharan. And well, no shit, Sherlock. No. Yeah. No, this was clearly, they're saying that this is clearly an African skull, man. Yeah. But they're saying also in the same, well, there's huge amounts of overlap. That's what you call one of those. That's what you call I don't want to call it a false dichotomy. It's kind of like a logical fallacy. That's like a logical fallacy. A plus B doesn't equal C. It's like, what are you talking about? It's complete and utter logical fallacy to mention the fact that there's overlap. Yeah, there is overlap, but do Europeans exhibit these traits? No. So there might be overlap in one direction, but not the other direction. It was emphasized that any such determination is difficult given the wide variation in cranial morphology seen both within and between populations. So can you see the cope there? That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's a logical fallacy, because they know that there is a huge amount of overlap. The overlap tends to be from African into the European. You don't tend to have overlap from European into the African. They are restricted. They are a subset, and these traits sit outside of the subset of European expression. That's a fact, and they're aware of that. Let's carry on. This would make Beecher Head woman one of the earliest individuals of recent sub-Saharan and sub-African ancestry. They're not even sub-Saharan. Now they're saying sub-African, below Africa. She got sub-African ancestry. Yeah, she's from Antarctica. Yeah, sub-African ancestry identified thus far in Britain. Population movement from Northern Africa into Britain during Roman period has been well established, both on, so look at that, Population movement, now they're going to bring in Northern Africa. Okay. So remember what I said about playing with semantics. So now that we've established, oh, she's probably black, we're just going to talk about North Africa, knowing that the general public are going to hear North Africa and they're going to see Caucasians. But we're going to talk about, oh yeah, North African interbreeding during the Roman period. What has North Africa got anything to do with this discussion? North Africa has got nothing to do with this discussion. Unless you're going to preface this and make it clear that North Africa during the Roman time was occupied by black people, which you're not going to do. So why are you mentioning it? During the Roman period has been well established both on an individual and military unit level. This is evidenced by inscribed altars, tombs. And by the way, what you'll find in these studies, these genetic studies, they give you really piss poor historical overviews, like really piss poor, like GCSE level, kind of like, did they just get like, you know, Google or friggin' Chat GPT just to do a quick summary? And they do it with no expertise, and they do it deliberately so they can come up with any conclusions that they like. During the Roman period, North Africa was a culturally complex region characterized by centuries of mixing with, by the way, not just North Africa, okay? Yeah, all of the Mediterranean. But once again, they won't say that either. They won't say that either. Sub-Saharan Africans were known as oh my god, they're trying to talk about, oh, this is cringe. All right, so now they're gonna actually start trying to talk about actual African history here. Sub-Saharan Africans were known as Ethiopians and are depicted quite frequently in Roman art, with the cultural significance of these figurines, vessels, and other objects still much debated. So then when they say Sub-Saharan Africans here now, they are talking about black people, okay? You're talking about, you'll say, they want to say black people were known as Ethiopians, but they're going to say Sub-Saharan Africans were known as Ethiopians because actually Ethiopians were known as Ethiopians, okay? And those are people who are, you know, we're talking about Kush and certain parts of Africa, okay? The wider continent, yes, it did encompass a lot of the continent, but not every single group was classified as being Ethiopian historically. But anyway, Sub-Saharan Africa is known as Ethiopians, are depicted quite frequently in Roman art, with the cultural significance of these figurines, vessels, and other objects still much debated. Given military recruitment and trading patterns, individuals of African descent buried in Roman Britain are perhaps more likely to come from the mixed populations of North Africa than the Sub-Sahara region. So that, I mean, that was half decent. That was half decent. They're essentially saying there were black people in North Africa. They won't ever go as far as being honest, or at least I don't think they're even aware of what the population makeup of North Africa was. Do I think it's relevant to this? No, because we're not talking about, once again, we're talking about North Africa. They're trying to cope for the fact that someone who is phenotypically black has been discovered in Britain, and they're trying to explain it using some kind of foreign integration, but they would never do that if it was the other way around. The white people they find would have always been there. So you have to understand what's going on here. It's one, you know, this is a one-way rule set that they apply. Let's go on to the facial reconstruction. Alongside the 2013 craniofacial analysis, a 3D facial depiction of Beachy Head Woman was produced at the University of Dundee. This followed the Manchester method. Okay, so Manchester method, we know we are likely talking about Wilkinson. She uses that quite a lot. Okay, with facial feature shape determined using published anatomical and anthropometrical standards. So that's interesting. So that was done by Wilkinson. Okay, so the early one was done by Carolyn Wilkinson as well. That's very interesting. So she did both. So she's responsible for both of these. Okay, this one and so this one. Yeah, well, let's look at this. This one and this one. She's responsible for both. She went for thicker lips the second time round, but decided to thin the nose out. But we'll get there. We'll talk about that soon. When performing facial reconstruction from archaeological remains, the most likely hair, skin, and pigments are determined from the bioanthropological determination and relevant historical and contextual data, as they should be. Okay, you should be using the anthropological data that's available, which they'll do in all cases unless they're doing ancient Egyptians, in which case they will just sample the modern population and give no explanation for it. Okay, so this is what they frequently make and break their own rules. Yeah. Given the uncertainty regarding any historical phenotype and the variation in pigmentation across and within populations, researchers chose pigments that are represented in sub-Saharan populations. What? Now, I'm not saying you can't get people this pigment. Yes, this is kind of like a Ethiopian, a modern kind of like you know, Amhara. You might get people who have this hair, but the issue that I have with that is that the skull phenotype wasn't given those populations. The skull phenotype was giving you very specific populations in Africa. We've just gone through it. Okay, the extreme, dolichocephalic head, the post-pragmatic depression, the subnasal prognathism, the flat nose bridge, the snub nose, and the wide nasal passage, the square orbital bones. They know what kind of African they're dealing with here. Okay, they know for a fact they're dealing more with the kind of like over. But do you see how they say one thing and do the other? Okay, they've just said that. They just used words. Oh, we chose pigments that are represented in sub-Saharan populations. Like, you didn't really pay attention to anything that you ascertained about the skull. But also frequently occur across other global populations. In other words, black people, dark-skinned black people, can't be found outside of Africa, even though we're everywhere. Well, no, that was slavery. So what we're talking about, that was slavery. That's why we're everywhere. Goodness me. Thus, dark eye and hair colors, wavy hair type, and mid-tone skin pigment were depicted. That's got nothing to do. I mean, you wouldn't have had to mention sub-Saharan Africans in order to do this reconstruction, to choose these colors. Okay, you could have chosen loads of parts of the world. So this was, even in the initial reconstruction, you weren't being honest. Plastic eyeballs, brown iris color were mounted with the head model, and skin was painted using acrylic paints. A dark brown wig with long loose curls was attached to the model. Okay, we have the bulk isotope analysis. Right. As part of their we talked about this already, the fact that they did an isotope analysis, it came up local. I'm not going to read all of that. Let's see what this chart represents. So this is the isotopic profile of beachy head woman. So this is based on the isotope analysis where she sits. So basically, beachy head woman is here, this orange spot over here. So let's have a look. And on this one is this orange spot that kind of sits in the middle. Let's have a look at what figure, which one is it? Figure, okay, it's both of them. So SR and O ratios. There you go. Here's SR, here's O. Ratios indicate mobility patterns, and C and N. So C and N plotted against one another to indicate dietary profile. Okay, so she's kind of on the outskirts, but sitting within population of Fishergate, Eastbourne. Okay, cool. All right, fine. So yeah, she's local. And I know if anyone had a problem with her being local, it makes sense that she clustered to where she was actually found. Southern England. Makes sense. Ancient DNA analysis. In 2017, preliminary ancient DNA analysis on beachy head women was conducted by researchers from the Natural History Museum. The low-level sequencing carried out at this time generated an insufficient amount of data based on the number of reads nuclear DNA to analyze the DNA to publication standard. Okay, so they didn't analyze it to publication standard, but the results of that were enough for them to decide she wasn't African enough for them to pull down the plaque. Or was that one, or was that the later one? Maybe that was the later one, actually. Don't hold me to that, because there might have been a second one. So that would make this the third one. Let's carry on. The results, however, were suggested that she did not have recent sub-Saharan African ancestry, but was more likely to be of East Mediterranean origin. When we look for that study, and if you watch that video, you will see it as well, they actually ascertained that she had some ancestry that was unique to Africa. In other words, they hadn't found it anywhere else, and it was interesting, but it was unsequenced, so they didn't really want to talk about it too much, and they focused purely on the Cyprus one. But they mentioned that she had African ancestry, and they ignored it because they do what they want. That's actually in the study. You can have a look at that. Along with isotope data, the proposal at this time was that she may have been born in Cyprus and moved to Eastbourne as a young child. And that's when I think that is when they removed the plaque. DNA extraction and initial library building were carried out in 2017. 46 milligrams of bone powder was drilled from Petra's bone, blah, blah, blah. I think this is kind of repeating. So I'm just going to quickly give a quick shout out to, before I continue, and I forget that. Yep, I'm going to give a shout out to Macy. How you doing, Macy? I haven't seen you for a while. Good to have you here. The uncertainty is a cope. It's always they'll always introduce uncertainty where really there's not that much uncertainty to say, oh well, we can't make any conclusions, when it's something that's not favorable to the conclusions they want to spin. And then when they have uncertainty, they'll present it like it's certain. So just like now, the only time we're hearing about the overall uncertainty, thank you very much for your $2, by the way, this uncertainty of the first DNA test is now. Yet when they presented them before, it was kind of like, she's not African, she's from Cyprus, and they took down the plaque and they did all of that. But now it's kind of like, oh yeah, that DNA test is a bit crap. Let's be honest with you, like we could do a bit better. We've done better now. Let's go to this. In 2024, a human-specific DNA capture method, Twist Biosciences. So this is what we're talking about here, is a genotyping array. When we spoke about that before. So we're talking about running the DNA through one of these genotyping arrays, and these focus on specific groups that they have deemed to be informative. Now, if you don't know what I mean, you need to watch my other video, because that will make it clear to you what informative versus uninformative means. And in a Eurocentric biased framework that we find ourselves in, or dispensation that we find ourselves in currently, near enough all of those genotyping arrays, unless they specifically said that they are, trained on African data, are going to give you biased outcomes, okay? Or trained on African DNA, I should say. That was specifically designed for degraded human material and targeted variable sites on human nuclear genome. They don't have much ancient African DNA, which is one of the big problems that they have here. Laboratory methods follow the default protocol and used a bead-based DNA isolation method to replace the standard drying down protocol. Let me move on. Computational analysis, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to kind of skip over some of this. We don't have time to go through it all. DNA was found to be preserved well in beach-headed women. So this talks about DNA preservation and authentication. DNA is found to be preserved well in beach-headed women with an endogenous content of 13% or up to 30% from initial whole genome sequencing data. DNA capture and sequencing resulted in over 80% of variable, now here, 1240K SMP sites. So what are we talking about here? We got around, from what we can see here, 13% of our whole genome. But within that 13%, we've got enough to cover 80% of the genes necessary to carry out or to run it through a 1240K SMP site. Now, 1240K is a genotyping array. So this is when they're filtering out or filtering down the genome to things that they think are important or informative. Now, 1240K talks about the number of SNPs or the number of SNPs. So 1240K is 1.24 million SNPs. Now, the human genome has tens of millions of SNPs. Okay, tens of millions of SNPs. And they filtered it down to 1.2 million SNPs for this particular analysis. And they decided that these are important. Now, the problem is that these SMP arrays have been trained largely on Europeans. I talk about this before. Okay, these SMP arrays have been trained largely on Europeans, and as a result of that, they filter out informative data that don't sit within the European range. It's really important that we understand that. So what it means is it's looking specifically, it's like getting a I don't know, trying to analyze a A cell. Yeah, that's the best way. Trying to analyze a cell and then focusing specifically on one tiny part. Okay, so you zoom in on your microscope and you're only looking at that part to inform you everything that you need to know. That was a really bad analogy, but I couldn't think of a better one. You guys come up with a better analogy and tell me. Yeah. But the point being is that you read that they are focusing on a tiny part of the human genome, which they have decided is informative, but it's unfortunately not been trained on a broad enough spectrum of human samples to cast out all of the rest of that data. And it constantly is finding Europeans to be in the picture, sometimes when they're not in the picture at all. And once again, if you want to understand how that works kind of visually, have a look at the video that I did because it explains it quite well. But anyway, 80% of variable 1240K SMP sites. So it's got 80% of what was necessary to run it through this kind of like gene typing array, being covered by 5 or more unique reads. DNA damage patterns seen for both whole genome sequencing and capture data are in keeping with provenance of the material. PMD filtering of the read set shows a high proportion of retained reads. So let's get down to here. So this once again just talks about, you know, capture and contamination, etc., etc. But I want to start looking because this is the way we get into the phenotypic analysis, and we should be used to this. So they use the high-risk plex X. Once again, if you've been on previous live streams, you'll know what the high-risk plex XS is. This is the kind of like the phenotypic analysis tool that is used. So it's used to assess what someone looked like physically based on the genes that they carry, or is most likely to look like physically based on the genes that they carry. Okay, so if you have a look at this, it has a very, very high likelihood based on running it through this high-risk plex model for blue eyes, a very high likelihood. Now, this isn't a certainty, but this is a very high likelihood. 0.911% is a very high likelihood. Now, is there some concern that prior to running it through this, they've already run it through this? Maybe, but they only look at 40 genes. I think it's 40 or so genes to determine these phenotypic traits. So maybe that's not a valid refutation. But the point is that very high likelihood for blue eyes. Now, remember, they say Cheddar Man had blue eyes as well. So that's fine. They could have blue eyes. No problem there. Okay. Let's move on. So light hair, once again, very high likelihood. So what are the options? The options are brown hair, red hair, black hair, light hair, and dark hair. So light hair, they've got once again a very high likelihood, almost zero likelihood for blonde, which is interesting because that looks pretty blonde to me. So what is light? What's the difference between light and blonde? Oh, okay. So red hair, blonde hair, brown hair, red hair, black. Oh no, here. So blonde hair. So they got moderate to low blonde hair, moderate to low red hair, moderate to low black hair, but quite high red hair. And then over here, it's just between black hair and light hair, basically. No, sorry, just between light hair and dark hair. And they have much higher likelihood for light hair than dark hair. Okay, so once again, these are quite high. All right, so I'll be accepting of the fact that this is like, quite a high 95% chance of light hair, and 92% chance of blue eyes. So light hair and blue eyes. Now, people's alarm bells will straight away be ringing and say maybe someone with albinism or something along those lines is a possibility, or someone who just presents that way with light hair, you know, some of those populations that we find in like Solomon Islands. Possibility. Let's move on. Skin. Very pale skin is very low probability. Pale skin is relatively low probability. Intermediate skin is quite high, that's 70%. And then dark skin and dark to black skin are also very low probabilities. So you've got a very high probability of intermediate skin. Now, intermediate skin is not pale or very pale skin. Okay, we've already looked at this before. In fact, I'll find a resource for you to show you guys what intermediate skin looks like, so we know that we know what intermediate skin relates to. Okay, relates to, we've covered this on the channel before. Fitzpatrick scale. So the way the I'll just pull this one up. In fact, this one's probably a bit more accurate. Let me just quickly. This is a bit low res. Let me try and get a slightly higher res one. Is this high res? Okay, this is higher res. I'm going to open this in a new tab. So if we pull up the Fitzpatrick scale, okay, the way it works is Fitzpatrick scale 6 relates to, this is interesting, they haven't even bothered to differentiate between type 5 and type 6. This is a bit lazy. This one's a bit crap. Maybe I'll get a better one. Sorry, because that was not informative at all. Let's try this one. This is probably a bit fair. Yeah, this is a better one. So let me just pull this one up. Yeah, this one's definitely more honest. I'm definitely more honest. I'm going to quickly click on this one, click open image and new tag. Stay with me, guys. So here we go. This is a much better one. So 6 will give you dark to black skin. Okay, so this relates directly to dark to black skin. 5 relates to dark skin. 4 and 3 give you intermediate skin. Now, I don't understand how this complexion is different to this complexion. I think that they've been a bit generous here with the 3. I would say it would be a dark, kind of like Asian versus a modern Arab for this, not this light. So I'd say somewhere between Asian and Arab, and then this one should be in 2, and then these two are basically the same complexion with different lighting. But basically, she sits somewhere in this range, this 3-4 range, according to the analysis that they've done. So according to the analysis they've done, she sits within this range. Now, here's the thing. The high-risk plex model has given these figures. So I would never turn around and say, ignore this. We're not going to think it, because we either accept it or we reject it. And I don't believe in doing kind of halfway houses. The only problem that I'd raise is if the possibility of running it through the genotyping array has affected the output. But I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if it works like that. So I can't argue that. But we do know she has intermediate skin, high likelihood of blue eyes, and high likelihood of light hair. But her skull and her features are still incredibly African, like really, really strongly African. So then you have to start to look at, well, which populations would give you that kind of like balance between those features? And I'm straight away kind of leaning towards that kind of Solomon Islands kind of look. So I don't know. I'm just going to kind of do this. 1 second. One second. Let's see if we can get an honest. So features, we are almost spot on with what was described, but I think complexion would, so this would almost be, if we had blue eyes here, would almost be a goodish match. But we have to be pragmatic about, so we have blue eyes, which is quite common in the Solomon Islanders, but we also have light hair. We also have the broad features that we're talking about that we can see on display here, and we have the intermediate skin tone amongst some of the population. Not all of them, but some of the population have that intermediate skin tone. I'm trying to think if there's other populations. Feel free to put them in the chat, but that's what was in my mind. You can't see, the issue is you can't ignore the data you don't like, which is what they like to do. You can't ignore the data you don't like. Okay, so yes, we can acknowledge. I'm willing to sit here and acknowledge, fine. If you're saying at the moment, based on your analysis, that these were the phenotypic kind of like colors, I'm willing to go with that. But I'm not going to use that as an excuse to ignore the skull measurements, to ignore the way this person physically presented, and they physically presented as someone who clustered with Africans. You have to marry them both. And this is something that they're not willing to do when they cook up nonsense like this. This is just not listening to your data whatsoever. The only thing you've listened to is their hair color and the eye color. You've ignored the features completely. Let's carry on. So anyway, you guys can see that how the high risk plex model has expressed itself. So it's important for you to kind of like read that and to understand that. Yeah. So sex classification, population genetic. Let's read here. Population genetic analysis. Prior to population level analysis, all aligned read data for beachy head women and all processed rural British Roman era individuals were trimmed of terminal ends. Pseudohaploid calling was performed at nucleotide positions on the human genome shown previously to be variable across populations. This is all a bit technical. Let's get to this part here. Initial analysis to determine population affinity of beachy head women was performed using admixtools 2. Principal component analysis PCA tests was performed using smart PCA, where a set of modern genomes were used to calculateegen vectors, and beachy head women subsequently projected. Outgroup statistics was conducted, and once again they used chimp and Mbuti as the outgroups. We spoke about that. But yes, chimp being used as an outgroup makes sense, but Mbuti, you being used as an outgroup, assumes for there to be no genetic affinity whatsoever, which is impossible if one group descends from the other. So if modern human beings descend from Africans, then you shouldn't be using Africans as an outgroup. Okay, that defeats the possibility for the test to give you back anything informative. So I wanted to kind of get to some of these results and see what they look like. I'm going to quickly just, oh gosh, this is, I want to just see this down. I want to see this image. I want to see if this diagram gives us anything useful so we can see exactly how they got to. So we got beachy head woman. You could just about make out, some of you guys. Beachy head woman is this triangle here. So this is a PCA analysis they've conducted here. We haven't got the percentages on the parameters, which is always very useful to figure out how close or distant they are from each other. So they've done this one test over here. You can see here, sub-Saharans down here, East Asians here, Western Europeans there, and then we have a PCA of 5.1 on the y-axis and 6.3. So this is actually in scale, which they fail to do a lot of the time. This is roughly in scale. On the x-axis, you can see sub-Saharan and East Asian are really distant, and Western European is really close. And they've already said that's linked with modern populations. Now, straight away, the thing I'm going to tell you is that they have run this through a Eurocentric genotyping tool. And I've mentioned that. Also, we don't know what the sample pool for sub-Saharans is. Sub-Saharans like the most genetically broad part of the earth. Yeah, so sub-Saharan, like they've got here a cluster of what, 5-6 samples. Unless you've got 2,000 samples here representing just sub-Saharan Africa, this is entirely asinine. It's a stupid analysis and kind of like comparative tool to use, because who's representing sub-Sahara? What population? Did you just get like 3 people from the San tribe, or 3 people from, 3 people from the Twa tribe, or where did you get these from? Did you try a wide span of Africans? Very, very unlikely. So this is entirely like, this is an asinine one. This one where it clusters amongst the modern Europeans is more useful. But once again, it's gone through a Eurocentric genotyping array. But we can see here it's clustering with, let's just quickly see here. So it's far from Italian Roman, but it's clustering with England Roman. Okay, so these are ancient samples. Poland Roman era, England, early medieval. I know you guys can't read that, but I can just about read this. Okay. So I'm just going to read this. World map with global populations colored by outgroup statistic value. So that's this first one. So outgroup statistic is showing distance, but once again, in order for them to get, so you can see yellow would be closest to Beachy Head woman, and purple would be the furthest. That you can see Central Africa is shown as the furthest, but they show a gradation. The problem, once again, guys, and I have to highlight this, is they've run this for a Eurocentric genotype, and as they're looking at a tiny, tiny portion of the genome, which always clusters Europeans as being closer, almost always. Okay, the parts of the genome where this individual might have related to other populations has been erased, and this is the issue that you have. Once again, watch my other video if you don't understand what I've just kind of like relayed to you guys there. PCA shows Beachy Head woman is most similar to modern populations from Western Europe with no attraction towards sub-Saharan Africans. The projection of additional Roman era individuals highlights the association between ancestry of Beachy Head woman and populations from Roman era Britain and Northern Europe. This ancestry differs from individuals associated with the expansion of the Roman Empire and instead resembles local and or rural communities. I do wonder how they managed to differentiate between local individuals and members of the Roman Empire who weren't local. How did they differentiate that? That'll be interesting to know. Did they do it on phenotypic basis? How did they decide that this person who's a part of the Roman Empire isn't a part of the native Roman sample? Or how are they deciding the ancestry of these people? That's a very important question to ask, because like, how are they deciding the ancestry of Beachy Head woman? It sounds like they're just doing it on the fly based on gut feelings here and there. And this is the issue. There's no consistency with the way that they approach this analysis. You know. Let's carry on. So these statistics, that's F4 statistics. So this is outgroup analysis once again, consistently show no evidence of recent gene flow between Beachy Head women and sub-Saharan Africans. But once again, no one was arguing for recent gene flow, with highly similar results obtained when gene flow between local and or rural Roman era individuals from Britain. So all of this is basically showing is that Beachy Head woman was related to other individuals, because they're talking about Roman era Britain. So you have to understand what's going on here. They're just basically saying that Beachy Head woman was closely related to other individuals that she was raised with and grew up with at the time. You don't know the ancestry or the race of these individuals. So they basically just gone on. So looking at this very, very clearly, guys, to be clear, the only thing that these PCA tests here have told you, and this outgroup analysis told you, is that Beachy Head woman clusters closely with other Roman individuals in Europe at that time. Okay, so Beachy Head woman who was Roman era British person clusters with other Roman era British people. It doesn't tell you who these people are. So her clustering with the group that she's from makes total logical sense. Okay, I'm interested to know where they got those African samples from as well. Did I miss that? Where did they get Africans? If they've tested that against modern African samples versus ancient Roman samples, then that's like really, really dishonest. So I want to see where they got the African samples from, because I might have missed that. Okay, so look, I'm going to read this again, guys. Yeah. F4 statistics. So look, guys, I almost missed this, but I want you to pay attention here. F4 statistics were used explicitly to test for evidence of recent African admixture in beachy head women and to infer the similarity between the ancestry of contemporary, so that means the same time, people that lived around the same time, contemporary Iron Age British populations and beachy head women when compared to contemporary individuals from the continental Europe and Africa. So they are suggesting that the Africans were contemporary, but I want to know where they got these contemporary Roman era Africans from. Where did they find these? They haven't talked about where that samples come from, because it lists us where the European ones come from. I want to know where that contemporary Roman era African samples came from, because that's going to give efficacy to this test. I'm very, very interested with this. Give me a second. Let me know if you guys can see this, because I can't see it. Okay, figure 4 and 7. I need to find this. Once I find it, I'll be satisfied and I'll move on. Sorry, guys, I know this must be getting boring for you, but I'm just trying to figure out. Okay, so here we go. So, no, they're still not telling me where the Africans are from. Just Afar, Bantu, blah, blah, blah. So it's giving me all of these groupings for the Africans, but it's not telling me where those ancient African genomes are coming from. Sub-Saharan Africans with highly similar results attained, blah, 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 blah. I just want to Roman era, European, MENA, African Roman era individuals. So European, Middle East and North Africa, and African Roman era individuals. I am so interested to see where those came from, what part of the empire, and how they ascertained. This is very interesting for me. Sorry, guys, I know I'm going on a bit of a. I'm going to move on now. Maybe we'll do a part 2 where I'll look into this. You know me, I like to do my little deep dives and figure out where they got their stuff from, because that's interesting. Anyway, updated facial depiction. Let's move on to this before we kind of wrap this up. In 2025, the original facial reconstruction of beachy head woman produced in 2013 was scanned using Artex Space Spider handheld 3D image scanner. So the original facial reconstruction, they haven't even used the skull. They've scanned the original facial reconstruction using the Artex Space Spider, handheld 3D scanner. So this is a scan of the original reconstruction. This scan was then imported into Unreal Engine 4.26, and you might as well just chucked it into a friggin' AI. Like this, so I acting like this is some deep technical process. Yeah. All right, let's carry on. Used to create a 3D digital model of beachy head woman that matched the facial morphology of the original, but it doesn't because you made the nose small. I can see that straight away. Of the original reconstruction. Intermediate skin pigmentation, no, that's pale. Blonde hair and blue eye color. Well, it should be blonde. It was light hair, wasn't it? And I think it was more towards the reddish, but anyway, fine. As informed by ancient DNA results, were selected to create a fully pigmented and textured 3D depiction. You've completely changed her phenotype. You've given her more nose bridge, because remember, she had she was supposed to be a flat nose bridge. Okay, she's supposed to be prognathic. You haven't even shown her from side view, because I'd like to see that prognathism, and I'd like to see that dolichocephaly. Where is that? Where's that all disappeared? Just hidden under all of the hair. This strange African skulled white woman that you've got here. Second iteration facial reconstruction. The scan of the iterations, blah, 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 physical model. So let's read this discussion. Decade-long investigation into beachy head woman's origins has centered around how her story has shifted over time and has sparked important debates about diversity and how we portray individuals from our past. The results presented here will no doubt add to this, but the story of the investigation into Beachy-headed woman is not out of the ordinary. All science is an iterative process, and one in which we've seen Beachy-headed women get progressively whiter, as you guys will notice. Um, and Beachy-headed woman represents a case study in how, as methods and technologies evolve, so can conclusions we draw from them. The case study of Beachy-headed woman does, however, raise important questions as to how methods previously commonly applied in bioanthropology classify human diversity and how these can be combined with multi-proxy biomolecular analysis. In other words, we can override previous conclusions made on people's physical anthropology based on the genetic conclusions we draft using our ascertainment biased results of genetics that's always going to cluster Europeans as being closer. The field of bioanthropological classification has seen significant changes over the last 15 years and has been moving away from the traditional morphological and anthropometrical methods of ancestry estimation due to their origins in 19th century biological classification of humans along racial hierarchies. Well, that's really interesting because the only aspect of bioanthropology, and you guys have seen it for yourself, that they're clearly rejecting is the aspect of physical anthropology, the skull measurements, the limb proportions, the everything that says this is a black person when they look at a skull. But all of the other stuff that was established during scientific racism, you're happy to hold on to those classifications. You've got the term sub-Saharan all over this study, a term that you should know has no place in anthropology and has no place in the study of human history. But you've got it all over this study. So clearly you are very selective in what you are tuning in and tuning out of these studies. These traditional methods of ancestry estimation using cranial metrics can help reify outdated notions of biological reality of race. So they're basically saying, well, we used to think we pulled up a skull that looked really African, but now if the genetics tells us this is a white person, it was just a white person with an African skull that no longer exists. But there's clearly a race of white people with African skulls. There's also the very large possibility and probability that some of the physical traits that are common in modern populations exhibited themselves differently historically. That's also very, very plausible. But moving on, classifying individuals into discrete racial categories overlooks the continuous nature of most human variation, but you've been doing it throughout. Literally been doing it throughout. Not sub-Saharan, sub-Saharan, not sub-Saharan. We found they had no You've literally been doing that through this entire study. So it's only one way, this analysis, as seen in genetic data. Blood groups and skin pigmentation, in addition to skeletal traits, have as much variation within as between ancestry groups and do not cluster into discrete categories. Bear in mind, a lot of black people fall into intermediate skin color. A lot of black people have blue eyes. Maybe not so many have light colored hair. That is definitely more of a rare trait. I am willing to accept that, but it does occur. It does occur. But the bottom line is you cannot deflect from the fact that you have an African skull here. It's not a European skull. It's not a white person's skull. And that new reconstruction is just a cope. In addition, skeletal traits have often as much variation between ancestry groups and do not cluster into discrete categories. So once again, they're trying to discard the skeletal conclusion that this is someone who sits outside of the range or the phenotypic range of Europeans. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. There's been much discussion of how to take this into account in anthropological ancestry estimation and the visualization of ancient peoples. In other words, the discussion has decided that we're going to make them white. Okay, there's been much discussion to this, and we've decided that this is what she looked like. That was a very short-lived and brief discussion that made you decide that you're going to make her look like an everyday white person. Okay. The case of Beachy-head woman, you know what I'm finding as well? I'm gonna be a little bit arrogant here and suggest that I think a lot of this broader bioanthropological approach that's being taken into making reconstructions is something that I know that we had an influence on, because they weren't doing this before. Before, when they were doing their reconstructions, they didn't justify anything. They just throw out any clad up and be like, yeah, we just sampled the modern population, and here's the skull and here's what we think they look like. Now they're all like, oh yeah, what we're gonna do is go do multi-formed analysis and we're gonna conduct this first of all. That's pressure, I believe, that's coming from us. And do not discount how much of an influence we have in the academic sphere. Do not discount how much of what they do is a response. I would be arrogant and not be surprised if a lot of this is a reaction to some of the content that has been put out about Beachy Head women. I would not discard that one bit. I would not discredit that as a conclusion one bit. I guarantee you, because we already know when it came to Cicero Marias, that he was watching my content religiously, and that influenced some of the choices that he made for reconstructions that he was going to do, including the Amenhotep III. So I have no doubt whatsoever that these guys watch what we put out and the critiques that we put out, and some of this is just put out to kind of like nip us in the bud. I am that. I'm not an arrogant person, but I am definitely leading towards that we're literally much more influential than they are making out. Okay. See there. Thank you, Nerd Large. Thank you, Nerd Large. Let's have a look at that. So Nerd Large has just put something here. I could read all of this, but I want to quickly just check out, because this is the thing. I had a feeling that they were being disingenuous there. So supplementary data. Is this it here? Yeah, this is it. So I'm just going to download the supplementary data, because Nerd Large has just put me onto something which might be really useful for us to look at. Bear with me, guys. This might take a one second. This will be the last thing we do, and then we wrap it up. But stay on, because this might be one of the most important things we do. And then I need to pack. This is a very good point, Shay, in regards to what I just said. And I was literally talking about the decisions that they're making in terms of like the studies that they put out and us having an influence. And he said they want to make sure that their perspective is on. I think it's definitely yeah. I'm in the Word doc, Nerd Large. I'm just quickly scrolling to the right place because I don't want to bore people. This is really useful. Thank you very much, by the way, Nerd Large. This could be because I was very interested to see where they got those samples from. In fact, this might be useful for us to look through. Let's have a look through supplementary. I don't know why I didn't start. Supplementary data is always much more informative and useful than the study, because the study is just opinionated crap. But the supplementary data tends to be less opinion and more just a presentation. So first of all, looking at the skull, okay? Remember with the nasal passage, I've spoken to you guys about this before. When it comes to the nasal passage of the skull, of the nose should represent the nasal passage should basically represent 60% of the width of the nose. Okay, so 60% of the width of the nose. So total width of the nose should always be like one third of the total width of the nasal passage on this side, and one third of the width of the nasal passage on this side, and that should give you the breadth of the nose. So we're talking about someone with a relatively broad nose. This is probably a nose in kind of size and breadth that's probably similar in width to mine. Very similar in width to my nose, maybe slightly marginally wider than my nose. So quite a wide nose, and you can see here. You can see it here. So you can see here, and once again, can you see that nose bridge? Okay, this is a very, very peculiar shaped nose to have someone who's not African. This is almost no nose bridge there. Okay. So you got, now you can see by the time it gets down to here, you can already see how much it's being sanitized. Can you see how they've built up a little bit more and they've just sanitized it a little bit? Look at the prognathism, guys. Let me zoom in here because I really want you to see. Look at the prognathism on this skull. Look at the prognathism. And obviously, you know the lips, they never give it the full size lips because lips are entirely the invention of the reconstruction artists, and they always give them unnaturally thin lips. Do those lips look natural to the phenotype and the features you're being presented here? No. Okay, no one's lips are that desiccated and that dehydrated. Okay, these lips are going to be, especially someone this prognathic, they're going to be fuller lips than this. So even this we can't take for certain, but we know these large rectangular eye sockets, this is just a very African person. You can see it here when it's less built up. Those eye, by the way, with rectangular eye sockets, the way the eyes protrude here is a much more likely phenotype than the way they've built up the brow here. So it's much more likely that the eyes protrude like they do here, but that looks a little bit too African. So you can see how much more this just looks like a black man, doesn't it? Okay, but you can see when they finish layering and adding layers and they build up the brow and they build everything up to kind of like pull it away from us. And as you can see, each step it undertakes, it moves further and further away from the reality of the features that it initially had. Look at that. Look at what they end up with here. And then to get the final one, they just scan it. They scan it. And then they just paint it cream and put long stringy, hair on it. It's like, it's a little bit ridiculous, isn't it? Can you imagine that? If you look at this, guys, I want you to take a long, hard look at this, yeah, that I'm circling. A long, hard look at this. How did they get that? How did they get that? Because remember, her phenotype has not changed, guys. I want to re-emphasize this. Her phenotype has not changed. The skull remains the skull. So how did they look at the breadth of the nose? Look how big the nostrils are. Please, guys. Yeah, this is what the skull determined how wide the nose should be. How did the nose end up being like that? Little button nose, little button nose. It's ridiculous. This is a massive leap. This is not the same. But can you see how they use almost like the Chinese whispers of reconstruction to turn it from this into this, into this, into this, and then into this. Now completely ignoring the skull. It's like, whoa, but we scanned the last reconstruction. Yeah. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a massive, massive cope session. Let's carry on. I want to find those samples. Thank you very much, Nerd Large, for getting me to look into this actually. Length distribution. Posterior probability for contamination in mitochondrial. Okay, so here we go. All right, so this is the admixture analysis, and I'm looking for the African samples in this here. So we have Algeria, Roman, Berber. Okay. I want to see if they give a date for that. We have South Africa, 1900. Guys, come on, seriously. So their ancient sample for one of their ancient samples for Africa is modern South Africa. So you're comparing BG head woman with people literally from in and around her village to represent England. So guys, I want you to see the kind of like, yeah, Chinese whispers is the only way I can describe it. I want you to see the Chinese whispers of their approach that they take here. Yeah, they get a person from Roman Britain. Yeah, I remember my argument is that she was probably representative of a large proportion of the population. She wasn't some kind of import from Africa. Okay, she was probably there. They compare her with other people contemporaneous to her, and they find she clusters with them. And they go, oh, well, she clusters with the British, she clusters with the English, and she doesn't cluster with Africans. Meanwhile, they're comparing her to Africans from 1900. Oh, what's it? 1900 BP. Sorry, guys. I've made an error there. 1900 BP would be contemporaneous. I've made an error. It said B before present, not CE. So I've made an error there. Okay, my bad. I have to scrap that. I just literally realized it said BP. So 1900 before present would take us to 100 AD. So it's a South African contemporaneous, a contemporaneous South African. That's my error. Sorry. I literally just saw that. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, that's fine. That's not ludicrous. Okay, it's completely far away. And if it's a South African 1900 BP, then they know for a fact they've pulled up probably a Quena person, a Khoisan person. Okay, because those are the only samples they have dating to that, and they know this is largely probably a very, isolated population they've pulled up here. Very, very high likelihood. Do they have any others? That might present a more, actual, and by the way, all of these Romans, all of these populations that we have along here, all of these populations here, we don't know what race they are, and it's really important to state that. I don't, just because they pull up Roman, like Beachy Head woman, all of these people could be phenotypically similar to Beachy Head woman or Ivory Bangle lady. They've only told you that all of these people resemble modern Europeans. I don't think they do. This is the issue. So they're comparing like for like. Okay, that's the issue there. But yeah, so anyway, I'm not going to slide from the fact that 1900 BP would make that sample roughly contemporaneous. Okay, so that's important to state. Let's carry on. Testing for signals of African, Middle Eastern, European integration into Beachy Head woman. So there's no significant evidence of gene flow with African, Middle Eastern, or continental Europeans individuals. Significant F4 estimates indicated absolute. Z scores over 3 are shown. So this is distance from chimp. England Roman rule. Okay, I'm still unhappy with that. I can only find South Africa 1900 BP. I'm trying to find what other African samples they've got. So, I mean, we can see this is really strongly underrepresented. So, I think the big issue that we've got, Nerd Large, what samples, which other ones did you find? Because I can only find that one African. Let's see what else you said, Nerd Large, because you found these. Did you find any others other than the 1900 BP? Okay, so you got South African, Roman, Algerian. Yeah. So Roman, Algerian, Berber. So they've only got two African samples, one from Algeria and one from South Africa. Now, the Algerian one isn't sub-Saharan, so they're not making any of their conclusions. So, guys, one thing to be clear, they're making all of their conclusions about the relatedness between Beachy Head women and Africans based on a single group of South Africans from 1900 BP that are likely going to be a pygmy population, so likely going to be Quena people. That's the highest likelihood. So they've made all of these conclusions about not related to sub-Saharan Africans based on a single population of Africans from a pygmy tribe. Do you understand what I mean? So this is where there's an agenda here, because they haven't, even if that was all that was available, and that might be the case, because like I said, they're not rich with ancient African DNA, but we know they've got more than that. But even if that was the case, be transparent about that in your study. But what they're doing is deception. This is where you go, no, you guys are so deceitful, because they're very aware that the only representation they have for sub-Saharan Africans is a single group. Yeah, a single group that is as far away physically, literally, as physically far away from the modern from Great Britain as physically possible. You literally couldn't pick an African group further away. Okay. And they've done that to go no relationship to any sub-Saharan. That's being incredibly bad faith and disingenuous. They know how people are going to read this. How many people are going to go into the supplementary data? Thank you very much, Nerd Large, by the way, to figure out that you've picked one group of contemporary Khoisan people from the very tip of Southern Africa to represent the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa, and to write them off of being any kind of like likelihood. And I'm not saying that sub-Saharans would cluster, by the way. I'm not saying that they might not cluster, but you haven't even done what would be classified as a reasonable attempt at studying this. You've gone into this with an agenda to disprove African ancestry, and this proves it, guys. If that doesn't prove it, guys, nothing else does. They've got one African group. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous, guys. And you've seen, I've done this, guys. I've gone through this and I've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. I haven't hidden anything from you. We've gone through together. We looked at the phenotype. I agreed. Okay, fine. If this is coming out and it's saying light hair, intermediate skin, blue eyes, I'm not arguing with any of that. But we have to look here honestly. We have to look at the phenotype honestly. And the phenotype of this person was that of a black person. Okay, when it was unfiltered. Yeah, we've looked at the genetic studies that they've undertaken, and it's been disingenuous. It's a disingenuous attempt at getting a match from Africa and writing off the, any kind of, I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is really, really poor. Let me quickly see what else they've got in here. So this is patterns of gene flow. So once again, this is outgroup analysis again. And this is an admixture analysis, which is just kind of like a visual thing. This is kind of like similar to QPADM. It's the same thing where you preload with groups, in which case they've got 6 here, 6 ancestral populations, which is, they've decided, by the way, very arbitrarily normally. And based on the colors, you kind of just see which one physically looks like it matches the closest. And we've got a close match with the England groups here. And they kind of like on an observational basis. But once again, we've got very, very skewed groups here. It's not honest or attempt, we don't even, have they even been transparent about what K1 to K6 is? 1 second. We select the K value of 6 for unsupervised admixture, blah, blah, blah. What are those 6 groups that they've used? So because English was in EHG. Oh, okay. So these are kind of like those ancient population groups that they have here. Yeah. And the same again there. So sitting between England, Roman, and Slovakian there. Once again, these groups aren't. We don't know anything about who they're tested against here. This is the issue. So I mean, I'm kind of satisfied at that point. I'm gonna leave it, and it's been going for long enough. We're nearly 3 hours. This wasn't supposed to be a 3 hour. Bloody hell! This wasn't supposed to be a 3 hour stream. But I wanted to kind of go through that with you guys and present everything to you. So I think we'll wrap it up there. It's getting really, really late, and I've enjoyed the stream. But I think we'll leave it there. But I guess my takeaways from going through this with you guys is the following. My takeaways is this: she hasn't physically changed. And I am going to stand on the fact that this person presented physically as an African, okay? And lots of African people will present similar genetic patterns to those seen in Beachy Head women. We've already seen that with Black people presenting wholly European, you know, or very high amounts of European DNA and being very, very, very black people. Okay. But this is how she presented. There's no getting away from that. If they were very confident that this is not the way she looked, then they wouldn't have had to change her features from this to this. They wouldn't have had to do that. That's a massive transformation. So obviously, I think they've made it very clear what their agenda was, and their agenda was to de-Africanize de-Africanize beachy head woman, and they've done that through quite skewed and selective use of genetic analysis as well. Once again, they've been using their biased their ascertainment bias and their biased genotyping arrays, which are going to amplify the European signals anyway. But then on top of that, even the ancient samples, we don't know what they represent. We don't know what the physical profile of these people were. We don't know if these ancient Italians and ancient this and ancient that were similar to her, phenotypically black people who happen to be in those regions. We don't have that data. Okay. So in terms of where I'm sitting with this at the moment, I think it's very, very interesting. I'm very disappointed at the way the study was conducted. Once again, there's been a massive lack of transparency. But I'm also going to keep my eyes open in terms of those high-risk plex results, because I would like to present with something that's realistic based on those results. The one thing I don't like to do is turn a blind eye and stick my fingers in my ears and go la 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 la. I don't think that is mature. Okay, I think it's important that if I can partially trust, so far the high-risk plex model has been quite, I think, a useful tool for proving black ancestry in places where they say it isn't. I'm not going to discard the high-risk plex now because it's pulled up someone and said it always says they have blue eyes, but it says they have blue eyes and blonde hair. I'm not going to discard it now. I think we have to look at that in the context of the other information we've been given and come up with a reasonable physical phenotype for this person. That's my kind of conclusion. I've enjoyed this. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy it? We've had a good, relatively detailed look at the article, some of the study, and some of the supplementary data. We obviously didn't have a chance to read through everything, but I hope you found it informative. If you did, guys, please do hit the like button up. If you want a part 2 to this, please do just let me know. Leave it in the comment. Leave a comment if you want to, if you want a part 2 and want to have a deeper dive on this, because I think there is a little bit of a way to go, but I don't know when I'm gonna have a chance to attack this more. But this feels a little bit like New Rat Man, where I was kind of like I was a bit done, but I'm not quite done. So I might look into this a little bit more. But I hope you've enjoyed this, guys. I've very much enjoyed it. I haven't live streamed with you guys for ages, so it was nice to get online with you. Let me give a shout out once again to Rodem, Kieran, Nata, Nerd Large, and Macy for your very generous donations. I really appreciate you all. Fantastic having you guys. Once again, hit up the likes, and I'll catch you on the next one. Once again, and just let me know in the chat. I will read it either in the chat or in the main comments how you like to go ahead with this one. Cool. All right, guys, take care. Have a fantastic have a fantastic week coming ahead, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.